Chapter 219. She said, "How can we not know? Take your fifth brother and I for example. Even though we were sold when we were young, we still know who our parents are. Even though they are already dead. But they are still our family and also where we came from." Yun Yang said, "From what I know, fifth brother doesn't know his own identity." Yun Zuyu's eyes shone as she chuckled with her hand covering her mouth. "Yes, I misspoke. He knew everything about flame indeed." Yun Yang said quietly, "I'm the same as fifth brother. I don't know where we came from or where we came from." A stiff smile hung at the corners of his lips as he said, "It's like we popped out from the weeds." Ah! Yun Zuyu was stunned. Looking at Yun Yang's blank expression, looking at this supreme cloud who had stirred up the world with only one hand and carried the heaven and earth mountain on his shoulders, a sudden wave of heartache that was like a tsunami engulfed his entire being. At this moment she suddenly had an inexplicable urge to hug Yun Yang in her arms and comfort him. She stood up and walked over softly, squatting in front of Yun Yang and looking up at him. She said softly, "Young brother, you still have sister-in-law. In this world, how unfortunate we are, but how fortunate we are at the same time. It's because we still have each other. After all, we still have kin in this world, we still have each other's comfort. It's all so precious." Yun Yang smiled softly. "Yes, sister Yu. We're all very fortunate." He took in a long breath and said, "I'm leaving. Sister Yu, I'm going to collect some interest tonight." Yun Zuyu said softly, "Be careful. You must come back alive. Only when you're alive can you speak of revenge." Yun Yang nodded. His purple robe fluttered as a lock of his black hair fell, covering half of his face. He turned around and said, "Sister Yu, you're really smart." Yun Zuyu was stunned when she heard him. Yun Yang had already walked out of the door, his voice so soft that it could not be heard came with the wind. "You already know my identity." Yun Zuyu wore a forlorn smile. Yun Yang had already disappeared. Vanishing under the lights. He disappeared into the night. Yun Zuyu walked to the window and saw a white cloud drifting away in the sky. At this moment, it was already past midnight. Mi Kongquan's back was hunched as he coughed softly. His fair and plump face was much thinner now, his wrinkles much deeper. He shut his mouth tightly. It was as if there was a snake circling around his body. The surging Shen Qi also revolved around his body. There seemed to be a small tornado spinning in the room. After a long while, he suddenly opened his mouth and spurted out a green smoke. Then he violently coughed twice and spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, a strange pop suddenly sounded out from his thigh, and a bloody hole suddenly appeared at the place where the sound came from. Then a sharp sword Qi rushed out from the bloody hole, and with a swish, it slashed a painting on the opposite wall into two. Mi Kongquan's already ragged breathing grew more ragged, his eyes filled with deep resentment. Ling Xiaozui's strike that day had not only severely injured Mi Kongquan, it had also left behind a pure sword Qi in his body. The sword Qi was too pure, never dissipating. It was also the strange sword Qi that had been destroying Mi Kongquan's body for so long. As long as Mi Kongquan cultivated, the sword Qi would react immediately, separating into a fine sword Qi and breaking out of his body. However, no matter how fine the separated sword Qi was, it was still left behind by Ling Xiaozui. It was not something that Mi Kongquan could defend against. Furthermore, it had detonated from the inside out, making it impossible to defend against. After such a long time, Mi Kongquan had only managed to dissolve a third of the sword Qi after exhausting his energy and purposely expending it. Based on the speed of dissolving the sword Qi, it would probably only take 2 months to completely dispel the sword Qi. However, the problem now was that the self-detonating sword Qi was more destructive than expected. Even if Mi Kongquan's physical body was still intact, most of its functions would be depleted and he would not be able to use it anymore. Perhaps it was a blessing in disguise or a blessing in disguise. Mi Kongquan had been on the brink of death during the palace's purge previously. No one had taken him seriously, allowing him to escape unscathed. Otherwise he would have been done for that day. Until now, Mi Kongquan, whose condition had taken a turn for the better, was much more cautious. Ling Xiaozui. Mi Kongquan panted heavily. Although his eyes were filled with resentment, there was more helplessness than anything else. He knew very well that there was no hope of avenging this grudge for the rest of his life. Even if he cultivated for the rest of his life, he would not be able to withstand Ling Xiaozui's casual strike. 2 little eunuchs walked in with a respectful attitude, cleaned the room a little and then left. It was late at night. A ray of moonlight shone in through the window, shining right before Mi Kongquan's eyes. Mi Kongquan looked at the bright moon in the sky, his thoughts drifting. A gaze that was as cold as the moon appeared in his mind. It was the Mi family member who had been captured by young Master Chiu Yin-san the other day. It was the old woman who was old and slightly hunched. Back then she had looked at him with such a gaze. From the moment he had appeared until he left, whether she had been under the enemy's control or had regained her freedom, her eyes had always been looking at him. Mi Kongquan heaved a deep sigh. That was his wife. He could still remember the time when both of them had just gotten married. They were deeply in love. Every night, he would hold his beloved in his arms, fly to the roof and sit on the roof tiles, looking up at the bright moon in the sky. It was because her name was Lung Yu. Since when did the warmth cease to exist? Yes, when he had joined the Four Seasons Tower and cultivated the ultimate cultivation method, he had become colder and colder to his wife. When he had cultivated to a certain level, he realized that this cultivation method was actually the legendary art of solitude. After cultivating it, his cultivation method improved by leaps and bounds. The progress was more than 10 times that of an ordinary cultivation method. However, once he cultivated this cultivation method, he would no longer be able to have sex. It was also at this time that the tower's order came. He was to enter the palace without any belongings for the greater good. At that time he was no longer able to have sex. He always felt that he was inferior to his wife. Coincidentally, there was such a mission. He had gone for it without hesitation. He still remembered everything that had happened on the day of their parting. He had always remembered it. His wife's gaze was distant as she watched him leave. It had been drizzling that day. So many years had passed, but she had never spoken to him. Even when he had gone back sometimes and met her, she had only looked at him quietly. Just like the cold moon in the sky now, watching him quietly and coldly. Mi Kongquan felt an inexplicable sourness in his heart. How long had it been since he had felt this sourness? It had truly been a long time. He walked slowly to the window and lifted his head to stare at the moonlight in the sky. The moon was still as clear and cold as it had been 50 years ago when both of them had looked at it side by side. It had never changed. However, the beautiful lady from 50 years ago was now. Mi Kongquan stared at the moon in the sky blankly as two sentences surfaced in his mind. Those were the two sentences that Leng Yu had said softly on the rooftop back then, with her arms wrapped around his waist and her starry eyes blurred. The moon is here today and you're here too. How wonderful. When we're old and look at the moon here again, I wonder what it'll be like then? Leng Yu smiled innocently as she finished her sentence and hugged him even tighter. Mi Kongquan could still feel the pair of soft arms hugging him back then. The yearning of the beautiful lady was still so clear. He stared at the moon in a daze and murmured, when we're old and look at the moon here again, I wonder what it'll be like then? For a moment, his heart ached so much that he almost suffocated. The image of the hunched, wrinkled, white-haired old woman with eyes as deep as a pool of stagnant water appeared before his eyes again. Leng Yu, Mi Kongquan could not help but call out. He closed his eyes, feeling like his heart was shattering into pieces. After a while he murmured, I'm sorry. A voice spoke faintly, sorry? Mi Kongquan, there aren't many people you've let down in this life of yours. Mi Kongquan's heart was still filled with an inexplicable bitterness. For a moment he felt a sense of hopelessness. It was a strange feeling of guilt that could break one's intestines. Mi Kongquan, who was in a daze, did not care about the person who had come with ill intentions. He said in a daze, Who are you? Are you sent by Leng Yu to punish me? The masked man in black was Yun Yang. He could not help being stunned when he heard the question. Leng Yu? Who was that? Yun Yang's momentary stupor gave both parties a buffer. Mi Kongquan had also recovered from the moment of hesitation and regained his clarity of mind. Exhaling deeply, his aura suddenly turned cold. Who is it? Yun Yang said faintly, Has Keeper Mi forgotten about the bet we've made earlier? Realization dawned on Mi Kongquan and he said coldly, So you're from the four noble families. How dare you barge into the inner palace at night? Yun Yang said, It doesn't matter where I'm from. What's important is that I don't repay my debt. Keeper Mi, aren't you going to invite me in for a seat? Mi Kongquan's expression was uncertain. Finally he said, Come in then. He opened the window as he spoke. If the other party was here to kill him, Mi Kongquan would not mind blowing the matter out of proportion. However, the other party was only here to chase him for his debt and he had indeed lost the royal luminary paste that day. If it was possible to keep this matter a secret, it would be best to keep it a secret. If they were to make a fuss, the other party would not be able to gain anything but Mi Kongquan would only be more unlucky. Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, Mi Kongquan still allowed the person to enter the room despite his reluctance. Chapter 220. Which family are you from? Mi Kongquan took 2 steps back and sat on the chair. There was still an inexplicable sense of melancholy in his expression. After confirming that the other party was only here to chase him for his debt, Mi Kongquan let down his guard. The inexplicable sense of melancholy had returned. Although it was not as strong as before, anyone who was not blind could see it. Yun Yang was not blind, his eyes were much better than an ordinary person's. Naturally, he could feel that something was not right. Was this fellow in a bad mood? Was he musing to the moon? Was he sad at the sight of things? Yun Yang was still wondering why he had missed the opportunity just now. It was rare for a cultivator of Mi Kongquan's level to be distracted. He had missed such a good opportunity to kill his target just now. Under normal circumstances, the same mistake would never happen twice. However, Mi Kongquan's state was not as absent-minded as before, but he had sunk into an eerily melancholic atmosphere. It could be considered as a state of semi-distraction, one that would last for a long time. What was this? Was it a stroke of luck? All in all, the situation seemed to be better than before. After all, even though he had been distracted, Yun Yang would have to bear the brunt of Mi Kongquan's death even if he had succeeded. Now, however, as long as he was careful, there was a high chance that he could achieve a complete victory, kill his target and retreat unscathed. Yun Yang sighed softly. I'm from the Chiu family. I have no choice but to come here. After all, Keeper Mi's actions are rather unorthodox. Mi Kongquan snorted coldly and said, could it be that the Chiu family's kidnapping and extortion are unorthodox? Yun Yang replied coldly, whether it's unorthodox or not depends on the person. If it wasn't for Keeper Mi provoking the Chiu family first, this reputed one wouldn't have come here today. Mi Kongquan wanted to retort but he did not say anything in the end, only sighing. He did not have the confidence now and was not in the mood to respond. After a long time he said, let's not beat around the bush. Regarding the previous promise, I didn't intend to renege on it, but I didn't intend to give it either. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I did. However, since you've found this place, I might as well be a bachelor this time and fulfill your wishes. Mi Kongquan's expression grew increasingly despondent and lost. There was also an unusually strong feeling of emptiness and helplessness. At this moment, Mi Kongquan felt a strong sense of boredom and despair. It was as if he had suddenly lost interest in competing with everything in this world. Yun Yang could feel the sensation clearly. What the hell happened to him? How could the mental state of a high-level shoujo be so decadent? What was the meaning of this? Facing a stranger who had suddenly appeared, he believed her just because she said she was from the Chiu family? Also, what was he doing sitting on the chair in such a daze? He didn't even have the slightest bit of vigilance. Even though Yun Yang was here to kill, he was a little confused now. If the target was too easy to kill, it would be a very strange thing. He didn't know where to start. Then the luminary paste? Yun Yang asked. Heh. Mi Kongquan tossed out 5 small boxes casually and said in a self-deprecating tone, if it were someone else, I believe they wouldn't have given it away no matter what. It's a pity that these things are completely useless to me. Yun Yang was struck by a thought and said, everyone has their own aspirations. This can't be forced. Mi Kongquan chuckled as if he wanted to say something but swallowed his words forcefully. Yun Yang could acutely feel that Mi Kongquan's emotions had fluctuated violently again. His eyes shone as he sat down on the chair in front of Mi Kongquan and said softly, I didn't expect Brother Mi to be such a straightforward person. I'm impressed. I hope that I can be friends with Brother Mi in the future after this. Mi Kongquan smiled noncommittally and said, may I ask for your name? What's your name in the Chiu family? Yun Yang's face twitched as he answered in a low voice, I can only tell you that I'm ranked top 5 in the Chiu family. Mi Kongquan's gaze wavered for a moment before he finally chuckled and said, it looks like your family values me quite a bit. Yun Yang said, but this reputed one didn't expect Keeper Mi to be so easy to talk to. Mi Kongquan chuckled coldly when he heard that and said, there are plenty of times when I'm not easy to talk to. Since you've achieved your goal, please leave quickly. This is the palace after all. It's not a place to be taken lightly. Yun Yang chuckled and said, it's not that I don't want to leave, but I was prepared before I came, wanting to spar with Brother Mi. Perhaps Brother Mi doesn't know this, but Brother Mi's name is well known among the 4 noble families, especially the Chiu family. But I didn't expect things to go so smoothly, so I'm a little surprised and a little embarrassed. It just so happens that Brother Mi seems to be in a bad mood, so I'll chat with Brother Mi to relieve your boredom. Oh? Mi Kongquan asked. Obviously he did not believe Yun Yang's words. Even if the Chiu family in front of him had the intention to return the favor, they had only known each other for a short period of time after all. Yun Yang sighed softly and said, actually, I can roughly understand Brother Mi's current state of mind. Martial artists like us, we've been living our lives on the edge of a knife, rolling on the brink of life and death. What we seek is nothing more than fame, profit, and power. However, for fame, profit, and power, what we give and what we gain may not be proportionate. Yun Yang sighed softly. There's no gain or loss in this world after all. After all, people like us, we've mostly gotten what we've imagined in the past. Even if it's not 100%, it's at least 80 to 90%. Mi Kongchuan's Adam's apple bobbed, but his face was still emotionless. Yun Yang knew that he had wanted to speak just now, but he had swallowed his words forcefully. Seeing that it was working, he had to continue persuading. Actually, this reputed one and Brother Mi don't know each other. We've even been enemies before this. Some words are indeed too much to say to a shallow acquaintance. However, today's situation is peculiar. It makes me want to say something. Brother Mi can be considered successful now. How can your state of mind be so dispirited? Success and recognition? Mi Kongchuan could not help but let out a bitter chuckle. He pointed at his own chest and said, Brother Chiu, do you think that a handicapped person like me who has an extraordinary cultivation base can be considered successful if all I do is serve people in this palace every day? Mi Kongchuan could not help but chuckle in anguish. Yun Yang sighed softly, this is a matter of opinion. The path is ultimately chosen by oneself. Since Brother Mi has chosen this path back then, it's probably the end now that you've reached the position of the palace's innkeeper. How can it not be considered successful? Mi Kongchuan chuckled bitterly. Chosen by myself? Chosen by myself? Ah. He took a deep breath and said, if I could choose myself, who wouldn't want a beautiful wife and concubines, a marquis for generations to come? Who would be willing to cut themselves off to serve in the palace? Yun Yang chuckled again and said, with Brother Mi's cultivation base and achievement, who can force you to submit if you're not willing? Actually, it's inevitable to deceive oneself and others in this world. There's no need to say more. Everyone has their own aspirations, I understand that. Mi Kongchuan's anger flashed before he put on an inexplicable smile and said faintly, men are afraid of entering the wrong profession, women are afraid of marrying the wrong man. This is the true truth. And the thing I regret the most in my life, is that I entered the wrong profession and even caused my wife to marry the wrong man. He lifted his head slightly and looked at the cold moon that was still gently shining down on him. There was a pained gentleness on his face, veins bulging on his forehead. His hands were clenched into fists, obviously trying to control himself. Yun Yang's gaze flickered as he said, but you've entered the palace after all and become a eunuch? This sentence was extremely vicious. Especially to Mi Kongchuan now, this sentence was akin to tearing up all of his scars. His flesh was a bloody mess and he was riddled with scars. It was a lethal blow to Mi Kongchuan when he was in a daze. The unabashed viciousness made Mi Kongchuan lose his rationality instantly. Under the moonlight, Mi Kongchuan's expression suddenly turned menacing amidst the everlasting gentleness. All of this isn't what I wanted. He was almost roaring like he was arguing, but also like he was responding to his own heart. A young eunuch's voice asked timidly from outside, Eunuch Mi, what's going on over there? Do you want this lowly one to go in and serve? The unexpected but reasonable eunuch Mi poked at Mi Kongchuan's scars even more as he cried out hysterically, Scram! Scram as far as you can. Yes. The young eunuch outside was scared out of his wits and disappeared in a flash. Mi Kongchuan's expression was almost ashen under the moonlight. He gritted his teeth and said fiercely, I'm a man too. My goal is no different from all of you. It's just that I had a master at that time. He did not want to say anything, but the resentment that had been suppressed for decades suddenly surged. He could not hold it in, he had to vent it out. Being forced by the other party's words, the tide grew stronger and stronger. He could not hold it in any longer and finally began to speak. My good master gave me a cultivation method. Mi Kongchuan's expression was menacing. I was only 23 years old then. I was young, I didn't know any better. I cultivated the cultivation method and improved very quickly. 1 year of cultivation was comparable to 10 years of other cultivation methods. Do you understand the feeling of rapid improvement and rapid progress? I concentrated on my cultivation and soon I reached the 3rd level. As I continued to cultivate, I slowly realized that my interest in cultivation techniques was getting stronger and stronger, and it was becoming more and more irresistible. As for women, it seemed like I was becoming more and more indifferent and I had no feelings for them. At that time, my wife had only been married to me for 2.5 years. Do you know that feeling? Mi Kongchuan chuckled bitterly. Yun Yang said faintly, cultivating in seclusion is an inevitable process on the path of cultivation. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that everyone's state of mind is different. Mi Kongchuan chuckled coldly. But then I truly understood. It's not that I'm indifferent, it's that I can't take it anymore. I can't, do you understand? Chapter 221. Then, I went to seek medical help but there was no improvement, until I found a doctor who was proficient in mystical qi. He told me that the problem was with the cultivation method I was cultivating, the art of heaven surpassing divine. The martial world calls this cultivation method the art of solitude. Mi Kongchuan said, my master gave me the art of heaven surpassing divine. He knew the pros and cons of cultivating this cultivation method. By the time I realized it, it was already too late. Even if I were to destroy the cultivation method I had cultivated and even my cultivation base, it would be useless. My body's condition was irreversible. Mi Kongchuan said, I went to find my master, wanting to ask for an explanation, but I realized that I couldn't find him anymore. Then I realized that there was nothing else I could pursue other than power. Slowly, I turned from indignation, from shame, from anger, from despair, to acceptance for the sake of acceptance. 5 years have passed. Within these 5 years, I've changed completely, becoming a completely different person. It was then that my master appeared again. He asked me directly, was it bitter? Was it bitter? What do you think? Was it bitter? Mi Kongchuan chuckled. Yun Yang said softly, then let me guess, your answer then should be, not bitter. Mi Kongchuan smiled through gritted teeth and said, that's right. My answer then was indeed not bitter. Since it's already like this, what's the use even if I were to complain? There's no meaning in it at all. My master was pleased to see that I was willing to accept reality, but he also noticed the stiff atmosphere in my home. Seeing how I was living like a year at home, he asked me if I wanted to go out, to change the atmosphere of my life. It was then that I blurted out that I wanted to leave. It turns out that at that time I already couldn't wait. My master asked me to enter the palace and said, since you can't achieve success as a man, then find another way. As long as you can achieve another success, this life will not be in vain. I chose to enter the palace in the end, until now. I haven't been home for a very, very long time. Until that day when your Chiu family kidnapped my family. I went. I saw my wife once again. My wife, she was so beautiful back then, but now she's an old woman with wrinkled skin and white hair. Mi Kongchuan smirked. Do you understand that feeling? No, you won't. If you didn't experience it yourself, how would you know what you've been missing? Yun Yang kept quiet for a bit and said, why did your master harm you like this? The resentment on Mi Kongchuan's face intensified. Yun Yang cultivated the endless divine art and calmed his heart down, making it as clear as snow. He then activated the power of his deific consciousness and spread it to its limit. Unexpectedly, he said faintly, you're not the only one your master has arranged to enter the palace all these years, right? Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translator, Endless Fantasy Editor, Endless Fants. Because of this, he naturally didn't hesitate to launch a divine sense attack at this moment. Mi Kongchuan felt even more dazed. The warmth of the past that had been buried deep in his heart surfaced one by one. The resentment in him rose like a wildfire. He blurted out without thinking, of course I'm not the only one. The Minister of Imperial Household, Jiang Zhong, came earlier than me. Yun Yang said, it can't be just the two of you, can it? Since you are plotting against Norda, if only the two of you participate, how can you stir up such a huge commotion? There will definitely be someone who will come to your aid. Mi Kongchuan sighed. Since I want to do something big, I can't do without the military and the government. Even the royal purge this time was mediated by people from both the military and the government. Speaking of which, I only found out recently that we have quite a number of people. Yun Yang's deific consciousness was working as hard as he could, while Emmy was doing its best to help as well. Yun Yang's tone grew even more indifferent as he said with a smile, I'm sure there must be something special here that you can't even imagine. It's not just one person. Mi Kongchuan smiled coldly. It's already beyond my imagination that Xin Yushi and Yang Buotao are our people. What's even more unexpected is that the top person under the Board of War's Grand Commandant is actually one of us as well. Such power. Before his words echoed in the air, Mi Kongchuan's gaze flickered with a flicker of emotion that grew more obvious. It was obvious that his self-defense instinct was activated as his deific consciousness struggled violently. Yun Yang, whose pressure had increased exponentially, was drenched in sweat. His eyes were still staring straight into Mi Kongquan's eyes as he said, "Then your master is the Four Seasons Towers?" Mi Kongquan looked conflicted, but he could not help saying, "Of course it's the Four Seasons Towers, Chiu." As he spoke there was a sudden bang. The chair he was sitting on had exploded. He stood up and hollered angrily, "You!" The saber light in Yun Yang's hand shone with a cold gleam. The divine edge was already stabbed deep into Mi Kongquan's chest. When he was distracted and was controlled by Yun Yang, he did not have the strength to resist at all when he managed to break free. Yun Yang's strike had succeeded. Mi Kongquan suddenly quietened down. Looking at the gleaming saber that had sunk deep into his chest, Mi Kongquan's expression was one of despair. The saber had entered his heart. He was dead meat. Mi Kongquan seemed to have lost his soul. Not even the rage of being controlled could be roused. He only looked at the saber in his chest and said in an infinitely calm voice, "Who are you? You're not from the Chiu family." Yun Yang did not expect to succeed so easily. He said, "You're right. I'm indeed not from the Chiu family. However, you haven't finished your last sentence. Do you still have the mood to continue?" Mi Kongquan chuckled self-deprecatingly. "Haven't I told you enough?" Yun Yang said, "To me, I'll never have too much information like this." Mi Kongquan could feel the saber destroying his meridians in a frenzy, but he did not put up any resistance. He sighed dejectedly and said, "You've grasped the perfect timing. Today is the first time in my life that I've lost my composure." Yun Yang admitted, "I didn't expect tonight's encounter to be so coincidental, allowing me to reap rewards that far exceed my expectations. It's truly a heaven-sent opportunity. Or perhaps the heavens bless the kind. Otherwise, why would Keeper Mi suddenly lose his composure on the last day of his life?" Mi Kongquan chuckled bitterly. "There's a reason for everything. When Ling Xiaozui's sword energy was severely injured that day, it had long triggered my inner demon. It's been cloudy and blustery for the past few days, so I didn't feel anything out of the ordinary. But today, the cold moon shines in the sky, the cold moon shines in the sky. Ling Xiaozui has knocked my cultivation base down to the second peak." Mi Kongquan said, "You don't have to be so careful. I'm already a cripple who's bound to die now. There's no room for resistance." Yun Yang replied, "I know. That's why I want to know more." Yun Yang spoke with utmost sincerity, "Eunuch Mi has regrets and imperfections in this life. I'm sure Eunuch Mi knows that you no longer have any chance to make up for it now that things have come to this. Although I've ended your life, if Eunuch Mi trusts me, I can still help you fulfill a wish, your last wish." Mi Kongquan's eyes shone. "What price do you need me to pay in exchange for this?" Yun Yang answered, "Your master's identity will suffice." Mi Kongquan's gaze was conflicted. Yun Yang said faintly, "I believe that one of the people you hate the most in this life is none other than this person. Whether you say it now or not, you're destined to die. So, it all depends on whether you want to seek revenge and leave a chance for revenge for yourself. If you don't want to, I'll send you on your way without hesitation." Yun Yang said unhurriedly, "This is the palace's inner court after all. The stench of blood will easily attract trouble. I can't stay for long." Mi Kongquan chuckled, taking a shaky step back and pulling his body out from the tip of the saber. Blood gushed out like a fountain. Looking at the gleaming, almost illusory blade, he exclaimed, "Good saber." Lifting his head to look at Yun Yang, he asked, "Which supreme are you among the 9 supremes?" Yun Yang kept quiet for a bit before replying in a low voice, "How do you come to such a conclusion?" Mi Kongquan answered, "Other than the 9 supremes, no one else has such a deep grudge against the Four Seasons Tower. It's said that wind, flame, blood and thunder are still alive among the 9 supremes." Mi Kongquan asked, "Which one are you?" A cloud appeared on Yun Yang's fingertip and floated in front of his chest as he spoke slowly, "Not only are wind, flame, blood and thunder still alive, I'm still alive as well." Mi Kongquan's eyes shone as he said in relief, "So it's Supreme Cloud, the 9 supremes' brains." Yun Yang answered, "It's me." Mi Kongquan smiled sadly and suddenly bowed deeply. "Supreme Cloud, I'm sorry." Yun Yang was taken aback. Mi Kongquan turned around abruptly and slowly pulled out a wooden box from under his bed, saying, "Lord Supreme Cloud, although we've been enemies and I, Mi Kongquan, have done the 9 supremes wrong, I'm relieved knowing that you're Supreme Cloud because you're someone I can trust. Therefore please, send this sum of money to my family. Other than that, pass this letter and this jade pendant that looks like the moon on my chest to my wife. Also have a word with her." Mi Kongquan's chest was bleeding profusely, his face turning pale. However, he did not care. His eyes were filled with regret and guilt as he said word by word, "I regret it, I really do. It's a pity that it's too late, there's no turning back now. I really want to watch the moon with her once, just like how we did back then. Yun Yang memorized it seriously and said seriously, I'll remember it. Thank you. An unprecedentedly relaxed smile hung on Mi Kongquan's face. It was genuine and sincere. He took 2 steps back slowly and sat on the edge of his bed, his trembling hands groping for his blanket and pillow. He exhaled slowly and said softly, Supreme Lord Spring Frost is he Hanqing while my master is Supreme Lord Autumn Frost. Now he's the Empire of Deyuan's royalty, the first high official. Chapter 222. Yun Yang shuddered and said, Thank you. Mi Kongquan quivered, blood dripping from his mouth and nose as he said, There aren't many people from the Hall of Autumn in Yutong because this is Supreme Lord Spring Frost's territory. This is all I know, I've told you. With Supreme Cloud's ability, it's more than enough to deal with them. You're a man blessed by heaven, heaven always blesses the kind. Now, I believe it. Mi Kongquan's body grew more and more hunched, his voice breaking. Right, be careful. There's a saber in the sky. There's a saber in the sky? Yun Yang asked subconsciously, stunned. However, Mi Kongquan was close to losing consciousness. His blood was almost drained. I beg you, after I die, chop my lower body into pieces. I beg you, Yun Yang sighed. Mi Kongquan was already at the stage of death. Everything he did was murmur instinctively. Suddenly, Mi Kongquan sat up from his slumped position. His eyes were wide open but his pupils were dilated. It was as if he had used the last of his strength to say hurriedly, Tell my wife Lengyu that I regret it so much, I regret it so much. I regret it so much. I regret? He did not manage to utter the last word of regret. His body straightened and slumped down. There was no more sound. He had breathed his last. However, regret and guilt could still be seen in his pupils that had lost their light. He leaned against the bed with his eyes wide open, motionless. Yun Yang left without a sound. Only Mi Kongquan's minced body was left in the room. Yun Yang had followed his last wish and chopped his lower body into pieces between his waist and crotch, leaving his upper body intact. As a bystander and a man as well, he could completely understand Mi Kongquan's thoughts when he was dying. Cultivating a unique cultivation method had become a fact. There was no turning back. What else could he do if he did not move forward? There was only one path he could take, even if he knew that the road ahead was darker. However, as he walked further and further, there was no light in his heart. How could he not be touched? How could his heart not be stirred? In fact, it was only when Mi Kongquan mentioned that the cultivation method was 10 times faster than the average cultivation method that Yun Yang decided to risk his deific consciousness interference to probe further for clues from the Four Seasons Tower's other members. Mi Kongquan had been cultivating for so many years and had cultivated such a shocking cultivation method, but he had only cultivated to the 8th peak pinnacle. There was a reason for that. If one's cultivation base progressed rapidly, one would at least reach the 9th peak after 40 to 50 years of hard work, even if one could not reach the martial artist's shackles of 10th perfection. However, Mi Kongquan had stopped at the pinnacle of the 8th heaven. It was obvious that he was haunted by his inner demons. The devil in his heart, coupled with his hatred, had long buried a huge threat. Otherwise, Mi Kongquan's foundation would never be shaken by a few words from Yun Yang. Before he died, he would rather have his body crushed than to live in this world with an incomplete body. This was proof of how much Mi Kongquan regretted this. Yun Yang's gaze was deep. His gains from this trip had far exceeded his expectations. Minister of the Imperial Household Jiang Zhong, Shen Yushi, Yang Buotao, and the number 1 person under the Grand Commandant of the Ministry of Military Affairs, Yun Yang did not feel much joy. It was more of shock and surprise that felt like a tsunami. If it had only been Minister of the Imperial Household Jiang Zhong, Shen Yushi, and Yang Buotao, it would have been fine. After all, with Mi Kongquan, the Minister of the Imperial Household as a comparison, it was not much of a surprise. However, the number 1 person under the Grand Commandant of the Ministry of Military Affairs, it made Yun Yang shudder. The 2 old marshals, Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin, belonged to the Ministry of Military Affairs, but they had long transcended the unique existence of the Ministry of Military Affairs. The Grand Commandant of the Ministry of Military was old and frail, having 1 foot in the grave. He had long let go of his duty and entrusted it to someone he had acknowledged as his successor. In other words, the entire military affairs of Yutong's Ministry of Military Affairs were now in the hands of the acknowledged successor. If that person was really from the Four Seasons Tower, the consequences would be unimaginable and difficult to deal with. No matter what, I've managed to uncover a few more people, and they're rather important ones too, Yunyang thought to himself. Then he floated away. Mi Kongchuan, I shall complete your request for you. The Mi family's alley in Tiantang City. Yunyang flew over in his human form, looking down from midair at the huge house in the Mi residence's alley. The structure of the huge house was different from the rest, occupying an exceptionally wide area. There was a pavilion built on the roof looking out of place. At this moment, there was a person sitting alone in the pavilion. He raised his head and looked at the bright moon in the sky in a daze. He did not move for a long time. Under the moonlight, the silhouette's white hair could be seen. Her eyes were murky and her face was lined with wrinkles. Her body was hunched as well. She was thin, as if she could be blown away by a gust of wind. She was an old woman with one foot in the grave. She was an old woman. The old woman hugged her knees, her body curled up as if she was cold. The night breeze blew, lifting her sleeves and fluttering her gray hair. Yunyang suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of loneliness. He suddenly recalled that when he had just entered the palace and met Mi Kongchuan, the latter had been leaning against the window, staring at the bright moon in the sky in a daze. Her actions, her expression, and her eyes were extremely similar to the old woman's. They were practically the same and there was no difference between them. Yunyang suddenly knew who this old woman was. This was probably Mi Kongchuan's wife, Leng Yu. It was already past midnight, the weather in November. The night breeze was chilly. The old woman sat there, but no one came to console her. It was obvious that the old woman's habit had long been known by her family. Knowing that it was useless to console her, they would not waste their breath in vain. The wind howled. Yunyang landed soundlessly, still masked and dressed in black. The old woman saw Yunyang descend from the sky, but her gaze was calm and indifferent, as if she did not see anything. After a glance, she turned around and continued to gaze at the bright moon in the sky, her thoughts focused. She was completely indifferent to the sudden appearance of a mysterious and powerful stranger. She was either too careless or her heart was dead. Is it Lady Leng Yu? Yunyang asked softly. The old woman's body suddenly trembled and she faintly said, Did he ask you to come? Yunyang was stunned. The old woman's gaze was equally distant as she said, It has been many years since someone called my name. Yunyang said in relief, That's right. It was Keeper Mi who asked me to come. The old woman sighed softly and said, Where is he? Why didn't he come himself? Yunyang answered, Mi Kongchuan is already dead. There was a strange change in the old woman's expression. Her gaze seemed to freeze for a moment before she slowly turned her head. Her eyes were fixed on Yunyang's face amidst her fluttering white hair. I did kill him. Yunyang said, but before he died he asked me to do something. I promised him. The old woman nodded slowly and said, It was you who killed him. There was a sudden silence. What surprised Yunyang was that the old woman was not sad or resentful towards him after knowing about Mi Kongchuan's death. There was only silence. After a long time the old woman said, After so many years, he is finally free. There was no hatred, no resentment, not even curiosity in her words. She did not even ask about what Mi Kongchuan had asked of Yunyang. As she spoke, however, her calm and indifferent face was already covered in tears. They fell one by one. In spite of this, her voice was still calm. You killed him. I should hate you. The old woman's faint voice rang in the air, but I only want to thank you now. Thank you for helping him to be free. He has suffered. He has suffered for 53 years, 7 months and 5 days. Yunyang's heart skipped a beat. 53 years, 7 months and 5 days. She had actually calculated it so clearly. Yunyang gently placed a large parcel in front of the old woman and said, This is Mi Kongchuan's lifetime savings. Not only are there plenty of rare treasures in it, but there are also banknotes worth millions. Mi Kongchuan's lifetime savings were not insignificant. The millions of banknotes were only a small part of it. The treasures were the truly valuable items. If they were sold, the sum would be an astronomical figure. In spite of this, the old woman's eyes did not even move. She only stared at the bright moon in the sky. Tears trickled down her cheeks slowly, as if she did not see the massive amount of wealth placed before her. Yunyang extended his hand. Mi Kongchuan has specifically asked me to return the jade pendant he hung on his chest to you. In his palm, a crescent-shaped jade pendant shone with a chilling glow under the moonlight. The old woman turned her head abruptly, her dry eyes glowing with an unprecedented radiance as she stared unblinkingly at the crescent-shaped jade pendant in Yunyang's hand. Her body suddenly trembled violently. She covered her mouth tightly with one hand as she trembled violently, tears streaming down her cheeks like pearls from a broken necklace. When Yunyang passed it to her, she gripped it tightly and suddenly sobbed, Brother Kun, Yunyang sighed deeply and said, he asked me to tell you. The old woman gripped the jade pendant tightly in her palm and lifted her head to look at Yunyang seriously. What? He said, I regret it, but there's no turning back. I really want to watch the moon with her once, just like back then. Yunyang's voice was slow and his tone was calm, but the glow in the old woman's eyes was even brighter. Yunyang could even feel a sense of happiness from the old woman's gaze. All these years of waiting had not been in vain after all. His infatuation had finally received a response. However, this response came too late. His last words were, to tell my wife Leng Yu, that I regret it so much, I regret it so much. Yunyang dutifully repeated every word that Mi Kongquan had said before his death to the old woman before him. He knew that this pitiful old woman had waited her entire life for these few words. If he had skimped on a few words to save trouble, it would be an extremely cruel thing for this old woman. Do you regret it? Do you regret it when a lifetime has passed just like that? Do you regret it when you've had it and missed it? Do you regret it when you've loved each other but you can only part heartlessly? The old woman chuckled bitterly. You regret it, but I don't. Chapter 223. The old woman murmured. Thank you, she said softly. You're welcome, Yunyang replied solemnly. The old woman hugged the crescent-shaped jade pendant contentedly and said softly, this isn't anything good, but it was our engagement back then. He's been wearing it all these years. She pressed the jade pendant against her face and caressed it slowly, her gaze as deep as the ocean. Finally she sobbed softly, I've never hated him. I've always been waiting for him. Why didn't he come back and tell me himself? There's also a letter from him. Yunyang said, he seemed to have written this letter a long time ago, as if he knew that such a day would come. The old woman smiled contentedly and said, thank you. Although I know that I shouldn't say this and I have no right to say it, this old one would still like to request something from you. Yunyang was silent for a moment before he said, please speak. The old woman said, can you use the weapon that you used to kill him, to kill me? Yunyang was taken aback. If I can die under the same weapon as him, perhaps I can catch up to him faster. This is my last request. The old woman said softly, please grant me this wish. Yunyang took a deep breath and said, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I really can't. To Yunyang, killing an innocent old woman for no reason was even more difficult than fighting He Hanqing head-on. The old woman's expression was one of understanding. She did not insist anymore and said softly, Mi Kongquan said that he regretted it, that he had let me down. Actually, he had never known how he had let me down since he was young. He doesn't even know what I'm asking for. The old woman chuckled softly. Thank you. I won't read this letter. She looked at Yunyang and murmured, thank you for fulfilling a wish of mine and Brother Kun's. As a token of our gratitude, you can visit the 7-star lake if you're free. 7-star lake? Yunyang asked in confusion. The old woman did not answer. She lowered her head and looked at the jade pendant quietly. Suddenly she grabbed the crescent-shaped jade pendant and kissed it, murmuring, Brother Kun, if there's a next life, will you marry me? Will you still let me down? Suddenly the jade pendant shone brilliantly. It was actually the qi manifestation of the infusion of profound qi. Yunyang was shocked. No, however, Yunyang had discovered it too late. The old woman's mystical qi had reached its limit, and with a forceful pull, the crescent-shaped jade pendant was suddenly stabbed into her chest like a sharp knife. It sank deep into his heart. Yunyang could only feel a buzz in his head. He had never expected the old woman to be so resolute in her desire to die. There was no hesitation at all. Furthermore, the old woman had a cultivation base of the 4th level of mystical qi. She had even used the most extreme method of self-destruction, exploding all of her cultivation base and destroying her own life force without holding back. If not for this, Yunyang would still have had the chance to save her even if the situation had taken a turn for the worse. Yunyang was filled with shock and frustration. However, the dying old woman did not seem to feel any pain at all. She actually persisted in grabbing the jade pendant and stirring it fiercely in her chest. A sincere smile appeared on her face. Actually, he didn't know. After he left, I also worked hard in my cultivation. Although I started late, I still wanted to continue this futile effort. Even if I couldn't catch up, I could at least get closer to him. Hee. The old woman laughed sadly. Even after I knew later that he would never return, and that the cultivation base I had cultivated could not be used against an enemy. But to deal with myself, it was always enough. To be able to hear these last few words of yours in this lifetime is enough. Yunyang sighed. For a moment he did not know what to say. The old woman's eyes shone brightly as if she had seen something. Joy shone in her eyes as she said, "Brother Kun, walk slower. Wait for me. I can't keep up." Suddenly her voice disappeared. Her eyes were still shining with surprise, as if they were filled with the glow of love. It was as if she had reunited with her lover in another world. However, she was no longer breathing. Her soul had left the netherworld. She was dead. Yun-yang felt a heaviness in his heart. His initial shock had been replaced by this true emotion. Lifting his head, he saw the moon in the sky, still clear and cold. Perhaps the moon that Mi Kongquan and his wife had seen back then was no different from the moon tonight. The moon was still bright, but the people had changed. It seemed that the voice above had finally alerted the people below, as voices could be heard gradually. "Who is it? Is the old woman still up there? Let's go up and take a look." Yun-yang sighed softly, his body slowly turning ethereal, turning into the howling cold wind in the air. "I hope that all of you really have a next life. May we never abandon each other in our next life. Stand side by side, the moon is round." Yun-yang grabbed the 5 portions of luminary paste and returned quietly. Now Yun-yang dared not keep any of the slightly more precious heaven and earth treasures or rare spiritual medicine in his embrace. Emmy did not care where they came from or what they were used for. As long as they were useful to Emmy, it would absorb them directly. After a few painful lessons, Yun-yang had finally learned his lesson. However, when he returned to his own courtyard, he had yet to recover from the heavy sadness. At this moment, Shui Wuyin was like an invisible man, quietly standing under the tree. Lao Mei and Fang Mafei, who were beside him, wore a strange expression. Shui Wuyin was just standing there, but even if they had seen him, they would have turned a blind eye to him. It was no longer a matter of whether he was superior or inferior. He did not even have the slightest sense of existence. In disbelief, both of them used their deific consciousness to search for his location. What shocked them even more was that they could not sense any movement at all. Such a living person, they had clearly seen him, but how could he be invisible as if he did not exist? Lao Mei and Fang Mafei exclaimed in disbelief, finding it hard to comprehend. How could there be such an extraordinary person in this world? It was only when Yun-yang returned that Shui Wuyin walked out of the shadow. Like a specter, he stepped into the sunlight. The dark fog dissipated, revealing the world once more. Lao Mei and Fang Mafei, who were not far away, exclaimed softly as they thought in unison, "Demon?" Then both of them walked away as if nothing had happened, obviously wary of this seemingly inhuman being. Shui Wuyin did not care about what they were talking about. Looking at Yun-yang's somber expression, he asked in a low voice, "You didn't succeed?" Yun-yang sighed, "Not only did I succeed, there were also many unexpected gains." Shui Wuyin smiled, "That's a good thing. Were there any other accidents in between?" It was no wonder that Shui Wuyin would ask such a question. Since he had said that he had succeeded and there were additional gains, this trip should have been a success. However, Yun-yang appeared to be troubled. How could he not be suspicious and worried? Yun-yang was silent for a moment before he recounted the night's events to Shui Wuyin. After listening to him, Shui Wuyin was expressionless as he said, "Young master, you have been too impulsive in this matter." "Young master, we are still very short of money now." Shui Wuyin said, "The money left behind by Mi Kongquan should be taken for ourselves. There's no need to send the letter as well. Let's not talk about whether it could be a trap, but there's really no need. Young master, you must know that since you've done something, you have to bear the price. This is the only truth in this world. No matter how cruel or regrettable the price is, it should be borne." Shui Wuyin smiled, "However, it is still a good thing for us that young master can return victorious and with unexpected gains." Yun-yang nodded and looked deeply into Shui Wuyin's eyes. Yun-yang realized that Shui Wuyin had his flaws as well. Shui Wuyin was meticulous, unflinching in the face of death, wise and steady, and flawless in the way he handled matters. However, he was simply too cold, apathetic, callous. It was as if he had a heart of ice. As a wise man and strategist, it was a good thing to have a heart of ice, but to Yun-yang, it felt imperfect. Only with flesh and blood could one be considered human. Wuyin, sometimes, we have to see the sentiments of the human world. Yun-yang said softly, "Even if they're enemies, it's only because we have different standpoints. It's one thing for us to kill them, but there's no need to deny their emotions completely. After all, this has nothing to do with what they've done. The heavens are heartless. Humans must have emotions." Shui Wuyin kept quiet for a bit and said, "Perhaps this is the difference in personality. To me, an enemy is an enemy. No matter how I kill him, it means the end of this matter. How can there be emotions? What does it have to do with me whether the enemy's emotions are rich or not? What I want is his life. Similarly, it has nothing to do with his emotions. Yun Yang sighed, feeling deeply that trying to reason with this cold-blooded fellow was like playing the lute to a cow. My current identity is that of a strategist. What I plan for is only victory and defeat, life and death. Other than that, I won't consider anything else. Emotions have nothing to do with me. Shui Wuyin said coldly, Boss, actually, one of the biggest factors that has foiled major events in this world since the beginning of time is the so-called emotions. Yun Yang sighed, no longer debating the issue of emotions. Talking about emotions with Shui Wuyin was like playing the lute to a cow. At the very least, when playing the lute to a cow, the cow would not refute you. But Shui Wuyin could refute you until you were tongue-tied and speechless. There are a few things that need to be dealt with as soon as possible. Shui Wuyin had already compiled all the information regarding the Nine Heavens dictum. Firstly, although the Nine Heavens dictum has always been under control, the people's hearts are fickle. It's inevitable that they'll slip up when they're completely controlled by personal worship and prestige. I suggest that we reorganize them. It's best if we can gather all the troops from all 9 directions together to form a unified command. Yun Yang nodded. That's right. This was indeed a must. The Nine Heavens dictum was like a plate of loose sand scattered around. It would not be easy to gather them together. In the past, when he was fighting on a small scale, the resources he could use were relatively limited, so it did not matter much. However, the upcoming actions would definitely be more and more significant. The scattered personnel and lack of strength were not the main issue. The possibility of exposure alone would be fatal. At the same time, the uncontrollability would increase. This was indeed an urgent matter that had to be considered and dealt with as soon as possible. Chapter 224. Secondly, we need to increase our manpower here. Shui Wuyin said, the manpower available now is too little and our cultivation base is even weaker. Once we meet a strong enemy, we won't be able to defend ourselves. How could Yun Yang not know this? However, it was not easy to change this. There were many experts in the world and many capable people, but as long as one's cultivation base had reached the 5th peak and above, there was basically no cultivator who was willing to be under someone else's command and obey orders. To put it nicely, Yun Yang was Supreme Cloud, the brains of the 9 Supremes. His reputation among the people was close to the pinnacle, but it was nothing to the real experts. How could he have a strong foundation in this aspect? How could he attract so many experts to serve him? It's easier said than done. Yun Yang chuckled bitterly. The third point is, Shui Wuyin said, we can't act with our own strength in the future. If others can hire assassins to kill us, we can, of course, hire assassins to kill others. Leveraging force to fight force is a great tactic we can use now. We can't give up on it. Although we'll need a massive amount of financial support to do this, we can't let it go. Yun Yang stroked his chin. This point could be considered. He had too much money to spend now. There's also the fourth point. Shui Wuyin said, Boss, your identity may have to be revealed. Yun Yang frowned. My identity? You mean? Shui Wuyin said, of course not your real Supreme Cloud identity. Exposing your identity as the 9 Supremes think tank will only attract endless attacks. I'm talking about your other identities, boss. Roaming the world, letting others know that the 9 Supremes are still alive and able to contact various officials. Leveraging the power of the entire country, the military and the government, Shui Wuyin said, regarding this point I think boss will have to carefully consider it. What should we do to ensure that nothing goes wrong? Yun Yang nodded deeply. I understand what you mean. I'll think about what to do and how to proceed later. Yun Yang had also discovered his shortcoming during this period of time. He could only use his popinjay identity as the son of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds to deal with whatever happened. Such an identity was obviously not enough. Perhaps, it should be said that it was more than enough compared to what was above. Anything else? Yun Yang asked. Yes, but the rest are more fragmented. Shui Wuyin said, I still need to sort them out before I can take them out for discussion. Yun Yang heaved a few long breaths. Also, about the few names you've gotten from me, Kongchuan, young master, there's a high probability of it being true, at least 80%, Shui Wuyin said. These people will be our next targets. No matter what, I have to collect some interest for my boss. My original target was Supreme Lord Springfrost He Hanqing, Shui Wuyin said. Although this person is an imminent threat that must be eliminated, after thinking about it, the chances of us killing him is still less than 10% even if we use all our means. In the face of absolute power, We are powerless even if we have the will to try. If we want to deal with him, it will only be possible if we have the help of an expert who is on par with him. Next, we can try to find some super experts. It would naturally be best if they could serve us, but, even if it is just once, it will be much more appropriate than us acting rashly. Shui Wuyin looked at Yun Yang. At this point he was really just talking and the rest could only watch from the sidelines. Shui Wuyin's heart was too cold. This trait had led to him not knowing many people, much less having no friends. Yun Yang smiled bitterly, looking at Bai Yishua's room, who had been recuperating from his injuries, feasting and not stepping out all day. He pursed his lips and said, "Which one of these masters is easy to serve?" If it had been before, Yun Yang would have been thrilled to have killed an important figure in the Four Seasons Tower like Mi Kongquan and received accurate information about the others. Now, however, he did not feel the slightest bit of happiness. It was because of He Hanqing. He knew that Supreme Lord Spring Frost was like a huge mountain in front of him, but he could not move him no matter what. This was what made him feel the most helpless. Just like what Shui Wuyin had said, in the face of absolute power he was powerless. In the past, the 9 Supremes had intimidated the world and thought that the world was vast. Now that they had fallen, Yun Yang was the only one left. Yet, his aspiration remained unchanged and his will to seek revenge was firm. Although his aspiration remained the same, as his cultivation base and skill improved, the more experts he met, the more he felt the vastness of the universe. He was still far from being enough. There was always a higher mountain in a flash and a wider world beyond the sky. However, Yun Yang's eyes shone suddenly. It seemed that this matter was not entirely impossible. "Feng Mafei," Yun Yang turned to call out. "We have a way here." Bai Yishue, who was dressed in white as usual, sat quietly by the window. He looked relaxed. Bai Yishue enjoyed the tranquil surroundings of the residence of Yun and the tranquil atmosphere very much. He had come to the residence of Yun to ask Yun Yang questions and get to the bottom of the matter. Although he was unwilling and wanted an explanation, he had also thought of this as a place to avoid trouble. After all, he really had nowhere to hide at that time. If he did not come here, he could only wait for death. However, after coming here, especially after living here for some time, he truly did not want to leave. Such a quiet place. Such a spacious place. There was no one he did not want to see to disturb him. It was the perfect place to avoid trouble. Up until now, not only had He Hanqing's subordinates not found this place, even King Qingguang had not found this place. All in all, Bai Yishue really did not want to leave. "I have injuries on me. I'll leave once I'm healed." Bai Yishue often comforted himself this way during this period of time. However, the truth was that while Bai Yishue's injuries were not light and he was covered in wounds, what was his cultivation base? With these 2 days of no disturbances as well as the buffering of many healing spirit medicines, his injuries had already recovered by 70 to 80%. He really didn't want to leave this time. He was reluctant to leave. After standing for a while longer, Bai Yishue slowly sat down with his legs crossed and began to cultivate his cultivation method. His injuries were no longer a hindrance, so it was only natural for him to resume his cultivation and cultivate his sword energy. Not only were his injuries severe from the previous battles, his cultivation base was damaged as well. Now was the time for him to fully recover his cultivation method. The earlier he recovered, the better. Even though Bai Yishue was beginning to miss the residence of Yun's atmosphere, he would not let his guard down. Who knew when King Qingguang or He Hanqing's men would come knocking on his door? Relying on someone else was never as good as relying on his own ability. There's not much resources left. I need to think of something. Bai Yishue sighed inwardly and began to fish out items from his embrace. Bai Yishue carried dozens of pieces of exotic metals with him. They were the ones he had pawned to Yun Yang previously. These exotic metals were extremely valuable. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were priceless. However, Bai Yishue's talent was unique and the cultivation method he cultivated was different as well. He needed to nourish his sword energy with a large amount of metal chi to improve his cultivation method. Although exotic metals were rare in this world and were known to have a higher value, there were plenty of exotic metals that ordinary people could not smelt or melt when they got their hands on them. They could only look at them helplessly without being able to use them, which meant that they were useless. In spite of this, these items were the best support for Bai Yishue's cultivation. Therefore, what he had with him were all sorts of exotic metals and metals. The metal chi on these materials should be enough for 2 months. Let's hope that these 2 months can be peaceful. Bai Yishue thought as he took out the metal pieces and placed them on the table. 2 months was not a long time, it would pass in the blink of an eye. However, Bai Yishue estimated that his cultivation base would be enough to recover completely within these 2 months. Once his ability was restored, he would leave Tiantang City as soon as possible and gather the mystical metals and metals once he was strong enough. However, Bai Yishue's entire body stiffened at the very next moment. His eyes were fixated on the various metals he had just taken out, his eyeballs almost popping out of their sockets. What was going on? The 3 pieces of meteoric metals that he had just taken out were dull and lifeless. They did not have the original luster of the exotic metals. Instead, they looked more like rotten wood. It was not like the meteoric metals were covered in tiny holes, like the eyes of a needle, densely packed. There were even signs of damage at the edges, as if the rocks had been weathered after being exposed to the wind and sun. Bai Yishue's eyes were wide as he extended his hand to pick up a piece of stellar steel to study it. Immediately he groaned, feeling weak all over. Once he touched it, Bai Yishue immediately felt that something was amiss. The meteoric metals were no longer of their original weight. They were light, like they were only slightly heavier than the most common piece of wood. Bai Yishue tried to break it with his fingers in disbelief. Crack. He broke off a piece effortlessly. Now Bai Yishue truly broke down. Even if it was a piece of wood, it should not be this weak. His hands were trembling, and he began to focus his attention on the next piece. Just like before, he could tell that something was wrong with it at first glance, and it broke with a pinch. Was this still the most mysterious and hardest meteoric iron in the world? Bai Yishue shuddered as he took out all the rest of the metal pieces, chalcedony, precious metals from the bottom of the sea, cold iron, like he had gone mad. They were all the same. Using this to assist in cultivation, forget cultivating and nourishing sword energy, even a kitchen knife could be chopped into a few pieces. Smashing it with a wooden board would cause a pile of powder to scatter on the floor. Bai Yishue was at a loss for a moment. His legs gave way and he fell to the ground. Not only did he lose his composure, his eyes were dull as well. It was the first time in his life that he had encountered such a strange situation. This was steel. And not just any steel. This was mystical steel, stellar steel, cold iron, the essence of gold and jade. This was not a biscuit. Now there were only 3 words in Bai Yishue's mind. What the hell? Yunyang walked in just in time to see Bai Yishue's dispirited look. Looking at the rare metals that Bai Yishue had pawned to him on the table, he immediately understood what was going on. 99% of the essence of the rare metals had been extracted by Emi. Bai Yishue did not understand, but Yunyang was well aware of it. The corners of Yunyang's lips twitched. His body that had just entered turned to walk out immediately. It was more important to leave this troublesome place as soon as possible. Why did he feel a little guilty? Chapter 225. Sigh. Just as Yunyang was about to leave, Bai Yishue called out to him. Bai Yishue was puzzled as well. This fellow must have come for something. Why did he leave as soon as he saw me? What's wrong? What is it? Yunyang looked confused. What is it? I should be the one asking you this, shouldn't I? You came in to look for me. Is there something you need from me? Bai Yishue thought so, but he could not help but feel puzzled as he said, Yunyang, this is very strange. I've come to your house, but the rare metals that I've collected have all turned to dust? What's going on? Yunyang breathed a sigh of relief inwardly. It looked like this idiot did not suspect him at all. What did you say? I say, Bai Yi, there's something fishy about what you're saying. Why does my house have such an effect? Why are you blaming my house when your things aren't working? Are you suspecting that someone in my house has ulterior motives and has exchanged your collection? Bai Yishue said sheepishly, the things are still the same, they haven't been exchanged. They've lost their value. Anyway, the good stuff isn't good anymore. Do you understand what I'm saying? Actually, Bai Yishue did not quite know what he was saying. Although he understood what he was saying and that was what he meant, it was not what he meant when he said it. Yunyang, who was familiar with the gist of it, pretended to be puzzled and said, What? Bai Yishue, what are you talking about? Are you sure you're speaking like a human being? What do you mean by good stuff isn't good anymore? What do I understand? Bai Yishue knew that his words were beating around the bush and was tongue-tied. Instead, he resorted to sophistry and said, Anyway, my things are fine elsewhere, but they've turned to dust when they're at your house. How do you explain this? Yunyang knew that Bai Yishue was only putting up a strong front now. He chuckled coldly and said, Bai Yishue, I've kindly taken you in to recuperate, but you're acting shamelessly because I'm kind-hearted, aren't you? Do you see that lock? Do you see this sword? Do you see this saber? Do you see this hammer? Even if these weren't rare metals, they should at least be iron, right? My things are fine, but you keep your things in your arms and say that they're spoilt when you come to my house. Sai Baishua, blackmail is an art. You can't do this, you can't blackmail me for sure. Think of a reason that can fool yourself next time, okay? Baishua sighed. Blackmail. Okay. Baishua flew into a rage out of humiliation. I was only discussing this strange matter with you. How did it become me blackmailing you? This is slander, downright slander. Yun Yang retorted sarcastically, the method of blackmail is too inferior. Knowing that it won't work, you've changed to slander? There was progress, there was progress. Let me ask you, is this how you discuss things in your family? In a few days I'll take a piece of dirt and discuss it with others. This is the inner core of a 13th level Shen beast. Why did it turn into dregs in your house? You have to pay for the strange things that happened in your house. What a great idea. As long as I discuss it with others a few times, I'll be rich, rich beyond belief. Baishua was flushed. I didn't ask you to pay for it, I was just saying. Obviously, a certain someone had lost his last bit of confidence. Yun Yang walked back unsteadily from the door. Why aren't you leaving? Didn't you want to leave? Baishua was annoyed and bewildered, obviously not wanting to talk to the god of plague in front of him anymore. This is my house, why should I leave? What right do you have to make me leave? Yun Yang said matter-of-factly, besides, I have something to discuss with you. I wanted to leave just now because I wanted to save some face for you when I saw how dejected you looked. Since you're so shameless, let's go by the rules. He had felt a little guilty just now, but after this argument Yun Yang was certain that this fool really did not know anything. What was there for him to feel guilty about? At once he felt reassured and confident. From this it could be seen that everyone's lower limit was actually limitless, or perhaps it was growing with each passing day. At least Yun Yang was like that. Don't talk nonsense, why don't I? What is it? Baishua wanted to retort, but he had already said what he wanted to say just now. He really did not have the face to retort, so he could only tidy up in frustration. His precious had turned into trash just like that, and he had to be reprimanded by this child. Of course it's between you and me. You haven't done what you promised me yet. Yun Yang said seriously, I know that it's beyond your capabilities alone, so I won't force you to complete it alone. I'll find a few experts to work with you in a few days and we'll do it again. Baishua was left speechless. He had already poked a hornet's nest the previous time. He had almost gotten himself killed, but he still wanted to go again now? Also, I'd like to ask. Yun Yang asked curiously, why does First Court King Qingguang want to kill you? Baishua almost jumped up. How do you know that First Court King Qingguang wants to kill me? I saw it with my own eyes. Yun Yang blinked and answered casually. I don't know who hired First Court King Qingguang to kill me. Speaking of this, Baishua was dismayed. I've always been kind to people, I've never offended anyone. Yun Yang turned to leave. You bloody executioner, you've killed tens of thousands of people, yet you have the cheek to say that you've been kind to others. You have the cheek to say that I'm embarrassed to hear it? It turned out that humans really had no lower limit. You have to be careful these few days. Don't expose your aura. Yun Yang blinked and said, because First Court King Qingguang might come to me at any time. Baishua was stunned. What? What's he coming for? Yun Yang said, because I've also offered to hire him. Hire him to kill someone for me. Baishua could only feel a flock of crows flying over his head. His speechlessness had reached its peak. You asked me to do something for you, then you hired someone who wants to kill me to do it with me? Is there something wrong with your brain? If you're so capable, why don't you go to heaven instead? Baishua then realized something. This bastard wasn't joking at all. He really wanted to go to heaven. The eerie aura that he was unusually familiar with had suddenly arrived and covered the entire residence of Yun. Even he was beginning to feel the eerie aura lingering around him. First Court King Qingguang had actually come. Although he was not here to kill him, the eerie aura lingering around him made Baishua feel uncomfortable all over. He could only do as Yun Yang had said, hide in his room and retract his aura. Not only did he not dare to go out, he did not even dare to move. His heart was filled with bewilderment. Could he find whoever he wanted to? A character like First Court King Qingguang was not an existence that could be easily found. How had Yun Yang managed to do it with his insignificant cultivation base? Baishua was puzzled. Of course, he did not know that great swordsman Fang Mafei, who was in Yun Yang's house, was actually First Court King Qingguang's assassin. It might be difficult for others to contact First Court King Qingguang himself, but it was not a problem for Yun Yang at all. Especially when First Court King Qingguang had just returned to Tiantang City, It was a unique period where he had yet to eliminate his target. You're looking for me? First Court King Qingguang arrived at the residence of Yun with a gust of eerie wind and ghostly cries. He looked at Yun Yang with slight surprise. If I'm not looking for you, why did I invite you here? Yun Yang felt that this fellow was spouting nonsense. Then why are you looking for me? First Court King Qingguang was still rather bewildered. Why had this fellow suddenly come looking for him? Why did it feel so creepy? Yun Yang could frighten the First Court King of Hell. This alone was enough for him to be proud of. Why would I look for you if there's nothing? Yun Yang felt that this fellow must have something wrong with his brain. Can we stop talking nonsense and practice? Let's get down to business, shall we? King Qingguang was still rather bewildered. I'm only an assassin's leader. What business can you talk to me about? Yun Yang lowered his head and sighed. If you weren't King assassin's leader, I wouldn't have looked for you. Looking for an assassin's leader is definitely to kill someone. Is there something wrong with this fellow's brain? There must be something important to ask Your Highness King Qingguang to come here this time. Actually, this is your specialty. Yun Yang went straight to the point. I'd like to discuss a deal with His Highness King Qingguang. A deal? First Court King Qingguang became smart at once. He actually winked and said, Young Master Yun wants to kill someone? That's right. Yun Yang smiled. If it wasn't for this reason, I wouldn't have the guts to ask Your Highness to come and tease you even if I wanted to. First Court King Qingguang said, but our fee is very high as well. As long as there's a price. Yun Yang said with a grin, a problem that can be solved with money isn't a problem to me. Qingguang coughed. At this moment he actually felt awkward and speechless. Who's the target? First Court King Qingguang went straight to the point. Tell me the name and I'll check to see how much it costs. As long as it's something I can do, I'll give you a 20% discount. Who asked me to find you pleasing to the eye? This thing can be discounted? What do you mean by pleasing to the eye? Do I need a ghost like you to find me pleasing to the eye? Yun Yang said with a grin, thank you for Your Highness' favor. Actually, my target is an old scholar in Tiantang City. I didn't want the concourse of the underworld to step in, but I've always been cautious in my actions and there's an additional layer of concealment, that's why I'm doing this. Unexpectedly, First Court King Qingguang raised his guard and said in a low voice, someone from Tiantang City? Old scholar? You'd better tell me the target's name. Yihan Qing. Yun Yang was straightforward. Yihan Qing? Chapter 226. Yun Yang said nonchalantly, it's reasonable for Your Highness to have heard of this person. This person isn't an ordinary scholar, he's the leader of the Empire of Yutong's literati, a third-generation assistant minister. He's very famous. First Court King Qingguang looked at Yun Yang suspiciously, vaguely feeling that this fellow was digging a hole but he did not know where it was. Yihan Qing was the leader of the Empire of Yutong's literati, an assistant minister for 3 generations. He might be a remarkable figure in the imperial court, but to First Court King Qingguang he was just an old scholar. It was not a big deal at all. Wait till I go back and check the concourse of the underworld special class name list. First Court King Qingguang was still cautious as he replied, as long as there are no problems after the investigation, I'll make the decision for you. Yun Yang rolled his eyes and said, Big brother, you still need to go back and check on such a small matter. I thought it could be settled now. You can go out later and this job will be done. Your Highness, First Court King Qingguang, your boldness. If this matter were to spread, it would really be embarrassing. First Court King Qingguang's face flushed as he said, this is the concourse of the underworld's practice. No matter what mission we encounter, we have to investigate it first. This is the duty of an assassin. What's there to be ashamed of? Yun Yang sighed and said, as a legendary level assassin, there are still so many concerns when it comes to accepting a small deal. Your Highness, although I know that an assassin's organization must be strictly disciplined and there are some forbidden characters or missions that can't be accepted, I'm afraid that I can't accept them. First Court King Qingguang nodded. It's rare that young Master Yun has some knowledge. The rules in our line of work are sometimes helpless. There are indeed some things that can't be done, some missions that can't be accepted, and some people that can't be killed. Once we touch these people, it's very easy to bring great trouble to our sect, and even a disaster of annihilation. Yun Yang said, however, the concourse of the underworld must value the name list of these dangerous people. The higher-ups must be very familiar with it, right? First Court King Qingguang replied, of course. In other words, the leaders of the concourse of the underworld, such as the 10 lords of the temple, would have memorized these names at all times. Am I right? Yun Yang said, I can understand it as these people's names are all in your hearts, and you can't accept them when others mention them. Am I right? First Court King Qingguang thought about it and said, yes. Looking at the world today, there are only a handful of people we can't kill. At least to us, the concourse of the underworld, it's almost negligible. After saying that, a sense of arrogance overflowed from his words. Yun Yang pursed his lips and said, then I find it strange. Your Highness, the First Court King Qingguang, the absolute higher-up of the concourse of the underworld, how could you not know if the name He Hanqing was on the name list? Do I really need to go back and retrieve it? Or was my understanding wrong? First Court King Qingguang scratched his head. This name is probably not there anymore, right? I really don't remember that name. It just feels a little familiar. Yeah? Since he's not on the list, he's someone to be killed. Is there a need to go back and confirm it? Yun Yang asked patiently. First Court King Qingguang shook his head blankly before nodding. Since you know that his name isn't on the list, Your Highness King Qingguang said that you want to go back and check. Yun Yang's expression turned cold as he said faintly, Your Highness King Qingguang, are you rejecting me tactfully? Or do you not want to help me at all? Or perhaps you don't want to give me a 20% discount and break the concourse of the underworld's other rules? First Court King Qingguang scratched his head again and said, Young Master Yun, you're wrong. You and I are like old friends at first sight. I find you very pleasing to the eye. Yun Yang waved his hand and said with a cold expression, Don't make it sound so nice. Since Your Highness King Qingguang can't make the decision, it's best that you return as soon as possible. I'll find someone else. I hope that Your Highness King Qingguang will not expose this matter in consideration of the assassin's rules. I Yun Yang am already eternally grateful. First Court King Qingguang's mouth was agape. Send the guest off. Yun Yang stood up coldly and raised his teacup. I still have matters to attend to, I can't keep you company. Your Highness, please help yourself. He was about to leave once he finished speaking. It was as if he did not want to stay for another minute. First Court King Qingguang felt his mind go blank for a moment. Was this fellow not being too practical? He was still talking about business with a smile just a moment ago, but when he heard that he could not do it in the next. That's not right. I didn't even say that I can't do it. I only said to check and confirm. Why did they suddenly turn hostile and start to chase him away? Does your face belong to a curtain? Pull it down just like that? Young Master Yun? First Court King Qingguang was exasperated as well. With his status, when had he ever suffered such humiliation? Immediately, his heroic spirit soared to the sky as he roared, We can still discuss this business. Yun Yang's footsteps did not stop. Why bother? Since I know that Your Highness can't make the decision, it's better for me to change to another party and find someone who can make the decision to discuss this matter. I don't want to waste everyone's time. I'm a popinjay young master, of course I don't mind, but Your Highness is a busy man, you still have to check and confirm the information. I dare not delay you, I can't make the decision? Is there anything in the concourse of the underworld that I can't make the decision? First Court King Qingguang felt a surge of anger as he said loudly, Deal. The concourse of the underworld accepts this deal. Yun Yang, who had already taken a dozen steps away, stopped immediately and turned back with a smile, friendly, gentle, and courteous. Oh, if so, I wish us a pleasant cooperation. Yun Yang knew that Your Highness is a straightforward person. You don't know this, but you and I feel like old friends at first sight. I've taken a liking to you since the first time I saw you. This is probably the saying of turning white as new, becoming like old friends in an instant. First Court King Qingguang's mouth was agape as he stared at Yun Yang's face, unable to wrap his head around the situation. What kind of situation was this? A moment ago, you were still fuming with rage and looking like you were about to leave. How could you say that we're having a pleasant cooperation now? He was indeed Tiantang City's young Master Yun, a man of the metropolis indeed. Just this cultivation base of changing one's countenance. If changing one's countenance and emotions could be a mystical skill, then this young Master Yun would already be unparalleled in the martial world, laughing at all heroes. Let's talk about the price then. Yun Yang laughed heartily and said, It's one thing to take a liking to each other, but don't brothers have to settle accounts clearly? Your Highness, feel free to name your price. No matter how much you say, I won't bargain with you just because you're straightforward. First Court King Qingguang scratched his head and said, Under normal circumstances, does the discount Your Highness mentioned just now still count? Yun Yang asked with a grin. Discount? First Court King Qingguang's brain short-circuited again. You've just said that you won't bargain? and now you're asking for a discount? What kind of person is this? He sighed inwardly and said, He Hanqing is an old scholar, but he's still the tutor of 3 emperors, the leader of a generation of literati. Just this alone is enough for the concourse of the underworld to bear a huge risk. In addition, we'll have to face the Empire of Yutong's investigation. Therefore the price can't be too low. King Qingguang calculated in his heart and said, A few years ago, we accepted a mission to assassinate the Empire of Ziyou's minister. We received 500,000 silver taels back then. Yunyang hummed in acknowledgement, not saying a word with a stoic expression. First Court King Qingguang gritted his teeth and said, But it's been so long, so the price has increased. Let's take the price of assassinating a minister as an example, 1 million silver taels. Yunyang snapped his fingers. Deal. 800,000 it is then. I'll give you the banknotes right now. Straightforward people, straightforward matters, straightforward energy. If you're happy, I'm happy too. First Court King Qingguang's eyes widened. 800,000? He suddenly felt his head spinning. Did I say 1 million or 800,000 just now? Yunyang smiled warmly and said, Thank you, Your Highness, for the 20% discount. I've saved 200,000 silver taels. It would be impolite to refuse, but I'm ashamed to accept it. How about this? I'll treat you tonight. What would Your Highness like to eat? King Qingguang's eyes widened, wanting very much to say, The 1 million I mentioned just now is already the price after the 20% discount. However, looking at Yunyang's sincere smile, how could he say such a thing? He accepted the silver taels muddle-headedly and took out the concourse of the underworld's contract. Both parties signed it, and a puff of blood turned into a puff of black smoke that rose into the sky along with the oath. The contract came into effect immediately. Looking at the black smoke rising into the sky, First Court King Qingguang's lips twitched uncontrollably. This was not right. It was only a contract to kill an old scholar. Why would there be black smoke rising from the underworld? This was a high-grade oath contract that had been approved by Heaven's Will after going through an arcane art. Logically speaking, the most it could do was emit a puff of white smoke. Even when he accepted the mission to kill someone like Bai Yixue, there was only a puff of green smoke. Why was there black smoke now? Could it be that He Hanqing had another identity other than being the leader of the School of Literature and the assistant of 3 emperors? However, the contract had come into effect. No one could go back on their word or they would be punished by heaven. First Court King Qingguang mumbled in his heart, praying inwardly, Perhaps this person is too important to the Empire of Yutong. I hope so. Come, let's go. I'll treat you tonight. Yunyang invited enthusiastically, I know Your Highness's identity. It's not appropriate for you to eat in public. Lao Mei. After calling out twice, Lao Mei walked over quickly. Young master, what orders do you have? Go to the best hotel, order the best dishes, get the best wine. I'm going to entertain His Highness King Qingguang tonight. Let's have a good drink, Yunyang said generously. There's no need for that. First Court King Qingguang was already on his guard, anxious to go back and check what kind of mission he had accepted. How could he have the mood to stay and drink now? For the quickest and most up-to-date novel reading, please visit Chapter 227. August is finally over. A fiery August, an August on the shelves, an August of passion. My passion is like a fire, burning for the entire August. Thank you everyone for your support in August. This August I will remember it. Although the monthly votes are still the same as the previous few books, with their chrysanthemums exploding on the last day, I am also very gratified. After all, I am already used to it. In fact, the truth should be, as a new book that has just been on the shelves for a month, to be able to achieve such results is already very impressive. It is all thanks to everyone's hard work and support. Thank you all. Now September is here. Another month has begun. Then I will tell everyone a piece of good news. Starting from the second half of last month, I have already cancelled all my foreign affairs activities. For the next 2 months, I have cancelled all my activities and am preparing to write with all my might. Am I good? Am I handsome? Today is the 1st of September. Let me play a game with everyone today. Yes, red and purple. As of midnight on the 2nd, the number of monthly votes we have will determine the number of updates. At midnight on the 2nd, if the monthly votes are in first place, the number of updates will be 200 on the 2nd. Ahem, don't ask me if I can do it. The question is whether everyone can do it. Hehe. Top 3. 10 minutes. Top 6, 6 minutes. Top 10, 4 minutes. Come on, let's meet on the 2nd. Come on, I am ready. Come on, let me show off. Come on, guaranteed monthly votes, come on, escape. Overtime. Writing. Chapter 228. I still have matters to attend to. Thank you, young master, for your kindness. Let us meet again next time. As King Qingguang spoke, he made up his mind that Yunyang would definitely ask him to stay if he said so, but no matter how Yunyang asked him to stay later, he could not stay. This was a serious matter. I see. Since your highness is so busy, I shall not keep your highness. It would be bad if I were to delay your highness's important matters. Yunyang was all smiles as he cupped his fists. Have a safe trip, your highness. Do come often when you're free. When First Court King Qingguang walked out of the residence of Yun, he felt like his intestines were in a knot. Why was everything this guy said so illogical? Logically, if the host had invited the guest to stay but the guest had declined, should the host not be even more passionate in asking the guest to stay? Even if he knew that he could not make the guest stay, should he not be more courteous? How could this young Master Yin? He was too honest. He was too honest. It's just that, why do I feel so uncomfortable when he's so honest? Forget it, I'd better go back and investigate He Hanqing's background. That's a serious matter. First Court King Qingguang told himself. Today's incident had a bad feeling about it. He could faintly feel that he had been tricked. First Court King Qingguang turned into a ghastly fog and left as fast as lightning. After a long time, at an unusually secretive location. First Court King Qingguang cried out, his face pale and drained of all color. He was trembling all over, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets as he wailed, "Despicable bastard, your father has been tricked by you." Initially, after checking the forbidden list and confirming that He Hanqing's name was not on it, First Court King Qingguang was finally relieved. However, when he flipped through the list of dangerous people, he discovered something unexpected. The concourse of the underworld's forbidden list meant that these people should not be killed if they could. Killing them would bring great trouble to oneself, but it was not that they could not be targeted at all. As long as the price was high enough, they could still be killed. However, the other list of dangerous people was completely different. The so-called list of dangerous people. The people on this list were the real danger. This danger was manifested in the fact that the target's strength was ridiculously high. You might not be able to kill him, and the person who attacked him might even die at his hands. Secondly, even if the target was killed, there would still be a follow-up to this incident. The target still had a powerful background behind him, and it was very likely that it would bring great danger to the concourse of the underworld, or even a catastrophe. This kind of person must never be touched. However, when King Qingguang looked at the name list, he saw a problem. When he first read it, he didn't see the name He Hanqing either. But just as King Qingguang was about to close the name list, he saw a place that seemed particularly familiar. He couldn't help but take a closer look. The Four Seasons Towers must not kill list. Mr. Nian, Saber, Sword, Snow, Frost, and Ice, the four supreme lords. The first 6 people did not have specific names, only code names. However, the 4 great supremacies had names. The first in line was astonishingly Supreme Lord Spring Frost He Hanqing. Seeing this, First Court King Qingguang shuddered, his eyes bulging. With a wail, he sprung up, his hair standing on end as the pores all over his body opened up. He was petrified. Oh my God, this must be a dream. The next moment, First Court King Qingguang looked through the list again with widened eyes. Finally he sighed, his face ashen. It's really him. An important figure of the Four Seasons Tower. Supreme Lord Spring Frost. He Hanqing. Such a person was not only extremely dangerous, he was absolutely not to be touched. According to the concourse of the underworld's principles, even if the other party were to offer billions of taels of gold, they would not touch a person. Who would have thought that he would actually sign an absolute death contract with the price of 1,000,000 taels today? Moreover, I've even given him a 20% discount on this 1,000,000 taels. First Court King Qingguang felt like he was going to die for a moment. Looking at the signed contract, thinking about the acknowledgement of heaven's will and the punishment of violating the contract. First Court King Qingguang wanted to cry but had no tears. It's over, it's over. I've been tricked badly this time. How could this happen? First Court King Qingguang paced back and forth in the secret chamber, walking 70 to 80 rounds in just a short while. He pulled at his hair so hard that he was almost bald. I must discuss this with the other brothers. First Court King Qingguang was as anxious as a stray dog, turning into a wraith fog and dashing out of the secret chamber. It was as if he was being chased by a 1,000,000-strong army as he ran back with all his might. He wanted to return to the concourse of the underworld's headquarters. You wanted to discuss it with the other brothers. This matter is too serious. Brothers, I've pierced a hole in the sky. First Court King Qingguang looked miserable as he sprinted. No wonder I felt a sense of familiarity. So that's how it is. There are actually 4 more words in front of the name He Hanqing. Those 4 words are the ones that really resound like thunder to the ears. As a result, He Hanqing's name was not that eye-catching at the back. Of course, I have no impression of the name He Hanqing, but why didn't you tell me that you wanted to kill Supreme Lord Springfrost? I'm finished. If the other brothers knew about this, how would they scold me? Are you an idiot? Is your brain made of glue? Even if it's not mush, it must be flooded. Have you been living for so many years in vain? Don't you think so? Why aren't you going to die? Everything else aside, these words were definitely there. First Court King Qingguang sighed as he ran. *CK, I knew that pretty boys aren't good people. Your father has really been tricked today. Your father must be blind. Why did I find him pleasing to the eye? Why do I even care about him? Pretty boys don't have good intentions, what a wise saying. King Qingguang left. Yun Yang finally heaved a sigh of relief. Having signed the contract witnessed by heaven, even if King Qingguang found out about it later, he could not go back on his word. Although this matter was despicable and went against his conscience, he could not care so much for now given the current situation. Bai Yishua also heaved a sigh of relief. Coming out of the room, he looked at Yun Yang like he had seen a ghost. His expression was one of disbelief, incredulity, and doubt. Bai Yishua's gaze was filled with shock. Young Master Yun, you must know He Hanqing's true identity. Bai Yishua said. How so? Yun Yang asked. Bai Yishua said, if you didn't know how terrifying he is, you wouldn't have plotted against First Court King Qingguang. You know very well what kind of identity King Qingguang has. The consequences of tricking him like this are unimaginable. However, you did it despite knowing it. This can only mean that He Hanqing's identity is actually more terrifying than First Court King Qingguang's. Yun Yang replied faintly, not necessarily. Who's He Hanqing? Bai Yishua asked in a low voice. Are you sure you want to know? Yun Yang looked at Bai Yishua with interest. Bai Yishua said angrily, I've already offended him. Can't I even know his true identity? Yun Yang looked at Bai Yishua with a different expression. Bai Yishua instinctively felt that something was amiss. If it's inconvenient? He wanted to say, don't say it if it's inconvenient. Before he could finish his sentence, Yun Yang had already said leisurely, He Hanqing is the Four Seasons Tower's Supreme Lord Springfrost. Supreme Lord Springfrost. The 4 words were like a thunderclap that rang in Bai Yishua's head. He actually felt a little dizzy at that moment. When he came back to his senses, Bai Yishua suddenly felt extremely speechless. He wanted to cry, but he had no tears to shed. I've actually offended the most terrifying sect in the martial arts world, the Four Seasons Tower. I even wanted to assassinate their Supreme Lord Springfrost. Am I tired of living? Bai Yishua looked at Yun Yang with a resentful gaze. This child has set me up so badly. It's useless even if you kill me now, it's useless even if you betray me. Because, you've already offended those you should have offended. Yun Yang's smile was gentle. Bai Yishua was tongue-tied as he said in grief and indignation, You've set me up. You won't regret it in the future. Yun Yang smiled. It was this smile that made Bai Yishua want to punch him just by looking at it. After a long moment of dizziness, he finally remembered and said, But, even if, you don't have a reason to set First Court King Qingguang up? I do. Yun Yang said calmly, and I'm confident. Confident? Bai Yishua was bewildered. What kind of person was First Court King Qingguang? Did he really not know He Hanqing's identity? The more Bai Yishua thought about it, the more confused he became. However, looking at Yun Yang's confident smile, he finally realized that his brain was not even worth mentioning compared to this young Master Yun before him. He decided to stop guessing and ask honestly. Young Master Yun, how did you do it? Bai Yishua was stuttering. Yun Yang looked at Bai Yishua meaningfully and smiled faintly. Because of you, I did it? Because of me? Bai Yishua could not wrap his head around it. What did this have to do with him? Bai Yishua felt that his brain capacity was severely lacking. He did not know if it was an illusion, but ever since he was forced to seek refuge in the residence of Yun after being injured, his brain had been lacking. He had made up his mind to seek refuge here under the pretext of denouncing Yun Yang, but Yun Yang's aura had turned the tables on him in a matter of seconds and his face had been peeled clean, yet he still could not leave in anger. Then his treasured collection had vanished into thin air. He had only asked a few questions and he had been reprimanded, almost breaking down from frustration. What truly made Bai Yishue break down and feel fear, even terror, was the fact that First Court King Qingguang had come today and Yun Yang had led the mighty King Qingguang into a pit with just a few words without him even realizing it. He had even casually brought up Heaven's will as a witness. It was a clear sign that King Qingguang would not pay with his life. Thinking back to the past, was he not King Qingguang's precedent? Yun Yang was merely repeating the pattern, changing the medicine but not the soup. Chapter 229. Thinking of this, Bai Yishue was speechless. He had just been laughing at First Court King Qingguang for being stupid, but what difference was there between him and King Qingguang? He might not even be as good as the other. At least, King Qingguang was the one who had been tricked, but he himself was the one who had come looking for trouble. The reason First Court King Qingguang came here and stayed for a period of time is to kill you. Yun Yang chuckled softly. The reason you came to Tiantang City was to avoid King Qingguang's death hunt. Am I right about this? Bai Yishue scratched his head. Yes, but what do the both of us have to do with this? Yun Yang snorted and said, it's a very simple and logical deduction. You were chased by him previously, running around in panic. How did you suddenly have the time to wander around? Not only did you have the time to gamble, you could even accept my request to do something for me. All these have already shown that King Qingguang hasn't been in Tiantang City during this period of time. He must have left due to some unexpected incident. That's why you can be so carefree. You're temporarily safe now that your biggest rival has left. Otherwise, how would you have the mood to be so carefree? How dare you wander around without a care in the world? Conversely, it also means that King Qingguang has no interest in anyone else in Tiantang City, especially when he doesn't know about you assassinating He Hanqing. Yun Yang said. What does this have to do with me assassinating He Hanqing? The corners of Bai Yishue's lips twitched. Could he not mention this? Of course it does, it's very much related. If he knew that you failed to assassinate He Hanqing and even suffered a loss, he probably wouldn't have accepted this deal. He would at least hesitate and confirm the target's identity and background. Even if he did accept it in the end, the price he'd ask for would be a terrifying sum. There's a high chance that I wouldn't be able to afford it. There are many people in Tiantang City who know about you. So, as long as King Qingguang is back, he'll know as long as he's given some time. Yin Yang said, so, I can't give him this time. Therefore, I went to look for him the moment he returned to Tiantang City. I didn't give him time to understand what happened in Tiantang City during this period of time. He doesn't know what his next transaction will be. Besides, I'm also betting on He Hanqing's identity. He Hanqing's identity as Supreme Lord Springfrost is very likely something the concourse of the underworld can't accept. However, with so many names on the list, I'm betting that King Qingguang will only remember Supreme Lord Springfrost, but he might not remember the name He Hanqing. If he remembers it, then there's no hope at all. But if he doesn't remember, then it will be my chance. Just like what you saw and heard, I seized my opportunity just like that. Before this, I had also thought that it might not work. But I just thought, no matter if it works or not, why not give it a try? What if his luck was good? So I gave it a try. Yun Yang smiled and said, so, this matter is settled. I really have to thank you for being his #1 target and being heavily injured by him. Most of his attention was on you, otherwise, it would have been impossible for him to succeed. I understand. When First Court King Qingguang truly understands the severity of this matter, there's no turning back. The contract has been signed. He can't bear the backlash of going against Heaven's will. Even if he's unwilling, even if he's furious, he has to fulfill his promise. Bai Yishue was full of admiration. I, Bai Yishue, have never admired anyone in my life, and I've never thought that there's anything that can't be solved with a sword. It's only now that I know that the most lethal weapon isn't the sword, but calculation. Bai Yishue sighed. Today's incident has let me know that even without an ounce of martial skill, one can still calculate the destruction of one's enemy, who has a high cultivation base. Yun Yang did not look pleased as he said faintly, of course, such calculation can achieve one's goal. In addition, it can also reap greater benefits in a short period of time, but, it's all despicable and despicable. If I had a choice, I wouldn't have done it. Everything is because of my lack of ability. Yun Yang said, the concourse of the underworld will definitely suffer a great loss if they want to complete their mission this time. I've used First Court King Qingguang's affection towards me in this matter. I'm despicable, I admit it, but if I had to do it all over again, I'd still do it. Bai Yishue pursed his lips and said, I wonder if young Master Yun feels apologetic towards me? You've tricked me the same way. Yun Yang beamed and said, that's why I'm prepared to compensate you. Bai Yishue looked at Yun Yang and asked in a low voice, how will you compensate me? Yun Yang thought about it while stroking his chin and said, I'll compensate you handsomely. I can guarantee that you won't have to worry about food or clothing for the rest of your life from now on. I'll take care of your basic necessities, food, lodging, and everything you have. As the price for all these benefits, you'll only have to help me with a few things occasionally in the future. Bai Yishue said in disdain, do you really think I'm stupid? In your dreams. He said angrily, I almost lost my life for just one thing and you're asking for a few things? You're obviously taking me in as your subordinate. Dream on. Yun Yang said slowly, Bai Yishue, if you don't agree you'll definitely regret it in the future. You'll regret it immensely, but it'll be too late then. Bai Yishue scoffed. He had already seen through Yun Yang's true intentions, how could he be fooled again? He would be an idiot if he were to fall for it again. However, he had just taken a few steps when he jolted, completely stunned. He turned back stiffly to look at Yun Yang. Yun Yang smiled. I've still been tricked by you? Bai Yishue groaned. I've been tricked by you again. He finally understood. Ever since Yun Yang had mentioned Supreme Lord Springfrost to him, there was no way out for him. He could still console himself if he did not know who the enemy was, but now that he knew, he was even more aware of how terrifying the Four Seasons Tower was. Just like what Yun Yang had said earlier, he couldn't go back even if he was afraid. He couldn't go back even if he betrayed him. Even if he did not become Yun Yang's subordinate, the Four Seasons Tower would not let him go no matter where he was. While the Four Seasons Tower was going against him, it meant that he was also going against the Four Seasons Tower. He was indirectly working for Yun Yang. This little bastard. Bai Yishue was utterly speechless. Can you not plot against me to such an extent? In this life, can you let me get away from this? Shui Wuyin smiled at the side but did not make a sound. Shui Wuyin was in awe of Yun Yang's success in dragging the concourse of the underworld into this mess. It was amazing. To Shui Wuyin, he did not have Yun Yang's psychological burden of being despicable. He was absolutely delighted to see it happen. He said, young master's move is brilliant. With the concourse of the underworld's involvement, our subsequent plans will be much smoother. If we can pull in other similar super gangs in the future, it won't be an extravagant hope to set up a plan to assassinate He Hanqing. Bai Yishue rolled his eyes, finally unable to listen to it anymore, and turned to leave. These two fellows really did not know what was good for them. Do you think an organization like the Concourse of the Underworld will be happy to be tricked by you? You're thinking too much. When this is done, the revenge from the Concourse of the Underworld will be unimaginably terrifying and cruel. I hope you can still laugh when the time comes. Just based on this alone, your father will never join you even if you beat him to death. However, when he thought about it again, Yun Yang was already a dead pig that did not fear boiling water. He had already offended the Four Seasons Tower. Why would he care about the Concourse of the Underworld? He would die either way. Bai Yishue heaved a long sigh as he thought about it. Who have I offended? I've been dragged into the world's most terrifying whirlpool out of nowhere. What Bai Yishue could think of, Yun Yang could not. Watching Bai Yishue leave, Yun Yang was no longer at ease, frowning with worry written all over his face. Shui Wuyin said, young master is worried about the Concourse of the Underworld's subsequent revenge, am I right? Yun Yang smiled faintly. Even if the Concourse of the Underworld's overall capability is weaker than the Four Seasons Towers, it won't be too far off. Such a colossus has been tricked by us. Even if they have no choice but to consider the binding of the contract, the troubles in the future will not be little. Strictly speaking, our scheme this time is mostly not worth it. We might even be killing ourselves. Shui Wuyin said, I do have an idea about this, but the follow-up will have to depend on the manpower that the Concourse of the Underworld sends out this time and the final outcome of this matter. It's still too early to talk about it now. Changes can never come as quickly as a plan. Yin Yang sighed. He was not being pretentious. He really did not feel happy about the success of his scheme. He was definitely not as relaxed as he appeared on the surface. The Concourse of the Underworld, the Four Seasons Tower. The two giants of the martial world. The Concourse of the Underworld operated in the dark while the Four Seasons Tower was completely hidden. One was an assassin organization while the other was a mysterious organization. As long as First Court King Qingguang accepted this mission, He Hanqing would basically die. With the Concourse of the Underworld's capability, it was not difficult to kill Supreme Lord Springfrost. However, as long as He Hanqing was dead, Even if he could incite a war between the two gangs, Yun Yang's own troubles would come one after another. After all, he was the mastermind behind this battle, the common enemy of both parties. More importantly, he had used Yun Yang's original appearance for this operation, and First Court King Qingguang had seen his cloud manifestation skill. If he were to connect the dots, he might come to the conclusion that Yun Yang was Supreme Cloud. It was not that Yun Yang had not thought of disguising himself to facilitate this, but how could First Court King Qingguang be so easily fooled? Other than Yun Yang himself, if it were someone else, he would not even bother about it. The plan now must be prepared for a rainy day and be prepared as soon as possible. Yun Yang's gaze flickered. Chapter 230. Mi Kongquan was dead. When the palace servants found Mi Kongquan's corpse, it was already the afternoon of the second day after the incident. Looking at Mi Kongquan's mangled corpse, the Minister of Imperial Household Jiang Zhong was enraged and ordered a thorough investigation. This news shook the entire imperial palace. Mi Kongquan was not an ordinary eunuch. Setting aside his identity as the Minister of Imperial Household, he had an 8th peak pinnacle cultivation base. His battle with the 4 noble young masters and his ability to survive Ling Xiaozui's slash had already struck fear into the royal family. How could such an expert not die without a trace? It was chilling and everyone felt insecure. Everyone shared the same thought, be it for public or private reasons. A thorough investigation was carried out. Yun Yang came to the House of Board of Justice's Minister Wu Lai for the second time. "Congratulations, Sir Wu." Yun Yang checked carefully and said, "Your son's body can be considered to have recovered completely now. He can enjoy the life of an ordinary person." Wu Lai was overjoyed, thanking him profusely. "However, your son has been weak for many years and his foundation has been damaged. In addition, his innate talent isn't very good." Yun Yang deliberated and said, "From now on he can only further his studies in terms of literary talent and knowledge. He mustn't cultivate mystical qi and increase the damage to his body." Wu Lai was extremely satisfied as he said, I understand. As long as my son can live as long as a normal person, this is already very good, very good, very good. This old man never dreamed that this day would come. How could I dare to have any other extravagant requests?" He smiled and said, "Besides, the saying goes that the poor study while the rich practice martial arts. To practice martial arts, one not only needs talent but also a large amount of wealth. As for our family, it's close to being penniless. How can we support the growth of a mystical qi cultivator? My son can live a peaceful life as a scholar with a clear conscience. It's already something that I couldn't even dream of. This old man is already satisfied." Yun Yang said, "Sir Wu has a heart of gold and a heart of gold. I'm sincerely convinced." Wu Lai said gratefully, "I should be the one thanking Sir Supreme Wind. Sir Supreme Wind's kindness to the Wu family is immeasurable. This old man, really has no way to repay it." At this moment Wu Lai was truly moved to tears. However, with his personality, he really couldn't bring himself to say something like, "If there's anything I can do for you in the future, I'll go through fire and water and die 10,000 times over." Because he would not use his power to make any promises. This was his foundation, his way of doing things, his principles of being a person, not going against his original intentions. Yun Yang chortled and said, "Yutong's criminal law is good as long as my lord is well. You're welcome." Wu Lai was so grateful that he was speechless. He could only pull Yun Yang's hand and shake it continuously. "However, there is one thing that I need Sir Wu to provide me with some information," Yun Yang said. "What is it?" Wu Lai said, "As long as this Wu can do it and it doesn't violate the laws of the country, this Wu will definitely not object." Yun Yang replied, "How much does Sir Wu know about Shen Yushi?" When Wu Lai heard this, he immediately frowned. Shen Yushi was the assistant minister of the Board of Justice, second only to Wu Lai. However, this person had always kept a low profile, almost like a shadow. Although he did his best to do things, he never showed his face. There were very few records about this person. In fact, the 9 Heavens Dictum's records about Shen Yushi did not show any abnormalities. If Mi Kongquan had not pointed it out, it would have been difficult to link this person to the Four Seasons Tower's spy. Yun Yang was rather doubtful about this. He could not just kill whoever Mi Kongquan said was, could he? What if he killed the wrong person? Wu Lai thought about it and said, "Shen Yushi? May I ask why Lord Supreme Wind is asking about this person? Is there anything suspicious about this person?" Yun Yang said, "To be honest with Sir Wu, I suspect that this person is related to the ambush at Tianshan Cliff." Wu Lai looked shaken as he said, So Lord Supreme Wind is suspecting this person as well? Sir, you've really put in a lot of effort. Also? Yun Yang asked in a low voice, what does Sir Wu mean? Wu Lai shook his head bitterly. Shin Yushir is cautious and keeps a low profile. He's never done anything that stands out. No matter what he does, he's never greedy for achievements. Even when he has meritorious deeds, he gives them to others whenever he can. That's why he has a good reputation among his colleagues. Among his colleagues, even when someone used him as a stepping stone to advance, he had no complaints. Sitting in a position and not moving for years, he's still calm and gentle. He's not impatient. Occasionally he's implicated and demoted, but he's never complained. Instead of saying that this person is a good man without a temper, it's more accurate to say that he's a sage among men. Wu Lai said, however, this old man has always suspected that there's a huge secret hidden within this person. How so? Yun Yang asked. From Wu Lai's description, Yun Yang had vaguely guessed where Wu Lai's suspicions lay, but he needed further evidence. This old man has been in the criminal law field for so many years. I know very well that in this world, as long as one is human, one will make mistakes and have weaknesses. However, this Shin Yushir, Assistant Minister Shin, has performed too perfectly. He doesn't covet an official position, doesn't covet wealth, doesn't covet fame, and doesn't covet working for the people, Wu Lai said. He's like an omnipotent being. He's never willing to achieve results no matter what he does. Even if he does, he'll push it onto others. He doesn't covet promotion or wealth. I've thought that perhaps he's a noble person who only knows how to benefit the people and doesn't seek fame or wealth. However, I realize that this isn't the case in certain matters. Sometimes I think that this person has been an official for so many years. If he doesn't seek fame or wealth, nor does he care for the people, then why does he do it? Wu Lai said, is there really an official in this world who doesn't have any goals? And an official of the imperial court at that? Yun Yang thought about it and said, Sir, have you investigated this person before? Yes. Wu Lai chuckled bitterly and said, back when Shin Yushir was my assistant, this old man had always been cautious. How could I not check if there was anything wrong with my assistant? So, I began to investigate. However, after a month and a half of investigation, all the Board of Justice personnel that this old man sent out had died a violent death without exception. It was then that this old man's wife was murdered for no reason at all. Wu Lai's eyes were brimming with rage and indignation. However, Shin Yushir was still my assistant and was respectful to me. If there was an errand, he would do his best. All the people who died had a reason for their deaths. It could be a coincidence, or they were killed by a strong person, or whatever it was. None of their deaths had anything to do with Sir Shin. However, this old man's investigation confirmed that the only similarity these people had was to investigate Shin Yushir. This old man reported this to the imperial court and asked the Board of War's Grand Commandant to assist in the investigation. The muscles on Wu Lai's face twitched, his gaze filled with deep hatred as he said, however, this old man's son met with misfortune that very night. There's still no evidence. However, ever since then he's been under my watch for so many years. Every time I've been promoted, he's been promoted along with me. He's been my assistant all this time. A strong sense of helplessness flashed across Wu Lai's face. This old man even made a mistake on purpose and requested to be demoted, wanting to be a local official to get rid of this person. However, he actually became my advisor a few days later. All the procedures were perfectly justifiable and without any oversight. When this old man couldn't take it anymore, it just so happened that His Majesty the Emperor was in need of manpower, so I returned to work in the Board of Justice. However, he was transferred back after only 3 days and was still my assistant. His Majesty was so gracious that he promoted me to the Board of Justice's minister, but Shin Yushir also became the Board of Justice's assistant minister. There were no traces of human manipulation in any of these incidents. With this old man's experience, this matter is simply unbelievable. If it wasn't for this old man's personal experience and a third party's account, I wouldn't have believed it. Wu Lai looked conflicted as he said, this old man knows that the person who has always been by my side reverently and respectfully is the irreconcilable enemy who has harmed my wife and my son. He's also a lawless murderer who has trampled on the Empire's law and discipline, but I can't do anything about him. I can't avoid him, I can't capture him, I can't investigate him, I can't kill him. I can only watch him hover in front of me day after day. Even if someone wanted to beat him up in a drunken frenzy, they couldn't defeat him. This old man doesn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. Wu Lai sighed deeply. I wonder if Lord Supreme Wind can understand this old man's feeling? Yun Yang could not help rubbing his face with his hands. He was speechless as well. Listening to this, he felt chills running down Wu Lai's spine. This Xin Yushi could be considered a weirdo indeed. Moreover, he could be so vicious, there was really no one else like him. I harmed your wife and your son. Then, I wandered around in front of you every day. I followed you wherever you went. I loved to see you hating me to the bone, but you couldn't do anything to me. Lin Sanjiu thought. Yun Yang made up his mind instantly. This Xin Yushi, I must kill him. Perhaps there were people in this world who would lie and kill with a borrowed knife, but this person would never be Wu Lai. Since Wu Lai had said that this person was problematic, then this person must be problematic. Yun Yang trusted Lord Wu Lai unreservedly on this point. Whether Xin Yushi was a member of the Four Seasons Tower or not was no longer that important. It looks like this Xin Yushi is really problematic and it's a huge problem. Yun Yang mused. Wu Lai said, there's definitely something wrong with this person, but I don't have any evidence to support this person. What can I do about him? I believe that if we try to punish this person, the other party will be able to produce countless pieces of evidence, witnesses, material evidence, and time to prove that we're wrong. Besides, there are countless officials of the imperial court behind him who are willing to testify for him. Yun Yang smiled faintly and said, Lord Wu is in the criminal law. It's understandable that you're particular about evidence, but I am not someone who follows the criminal law. Chapter 231. Wu Lai looked conflicted as he murmured, how can he be convicted without evidence? How can he be arrested? How can he kill? Isn't this? As he was mumbling to himself, he was shocked to realize that Supreme Wind had disappeared from before him. He didn't know when he had disappeared without a trace. Wu Lai was stunned for a while before he murmured, how can the national law be broken? Without evidence it's against the rules. While Sir Wu Lai was still in a dilemma, Yun Yang had already turned into a gust of cold wind, traversing dozens of miles in an instant and arriving at the house of Xin Yushi, the assistant minister of the Board of Justice. It was an extremely ordinary-looking residence, even more inconspicuous compared to the residence of an imperial court official. Yun Yang's manifestation of wind was shapeless as it seeped in directly. Only the soft tinkling of the bell on the eaves indicated that there was a gentle breeze. In the residence, a few guards were chatting in low voices, completely unconcerned. Yun Yang looked around and realized that only the study room was lit. There was someone inside. As for the rear courtyard, all the side rooms and the main rooms were pitch black. Surprisingly, no one lived in them. It was obvious that Sir Xin Yushi did not have any family members here. He didn't even have any maids or concubines. Lord Xin was quietly reading a book in his study. He looked calm and righteous. He was quiet and indifferent, and his sleeves fluttered in the wind. His square face and 3 strands of black beard fluttered in front of his chest. His jet-black hair was combed neatly with a few strands of silver flashing in the middle, indicating that he was no longer young. Yun Yang noticed the book he was reading. It was a collection of poems by his predecessors. He was reading it with relish, occasionally stretching his finger out and using it as a pen to write a few words in the air. Then, his expression would be filled with admiration. How carefree. Yun Yang could not help but compliment. After doing so many things, he was still able to be so calm and unrestrained. This person's mental fortitude was really amazing. Yun Yang asked himself if he could do the same if he were in his shoes. Yun Yang traversed the place quietly. He was certain that if there was really something wrong with Assistant Minister Xin, then there must be something else in this residence that should not exist. What he needed to do now was to find these things that shouldn't exist. In the study, Lord Xin Yushi, who had been reading a book, slowly stood up for some reason. With a book in one hand and another behind his back, he began to pace slowly, chanting as he slowly walked to the window and swayed back and forth. Has he already discovered me? Yun Yang's gaze flickered. With a single thought, a gust of wind suddenly blew past the window. As Yun Yang expected, Sir Xin's gaze, which seemed to be engrossed in his book, flashed with a glint before he shifted his gaze back to the book, as if nothing had happened and he had not noticed anything. Then he sighed, the wind tonight is so strong. It seems that the cold winter will come early this year. I wonder if the people are prepared to resist the cold. After saying that, he sighed again. He had the appearance of someone who bemoaned the state of the universe and pitied the fate of mankind. However, Yun Yang's pervasive wind had already discovered a vast space beneath Sir Xin's study. This righteous-looking Lord Xin actually had a secret passage in his study room, and there was another world below it. The hidden door to this secret passage was behind a painting behind the chair that Xin Yushi had been sitting on earlier. There's indeed a secret passage. Yun Yang did not hesitate. He flew out with a swoosh and went straight to the guards, knocking them out with a single slap. Pow pow pow, there was a total of 8 guards and 2 gatekeepers. In the blink of an eye, Yun Yang had knocked all of them out. He didn't have the slightest intention of concealing his actions. Shen Yusher's eyes glinted as he looked over through the window. This action had already shown that this person was not a simple person and possessed an extraordinary cultivation base. Yun Yang lifted his head leisurely and smiled at Sir Shen through the window, showing that everything was within his control and that he was not afraid of any reaction from Shen Yusher. In spite of this, Shen Yusher was still calm and collected. He held a book in one hand and paced around the study elegantly, reciting softly. He still looked like a frail scholar who did not even have the strength to truss a chicken. Yun Yang chuckled inwardly and walked to the window openly, knocking on it softly and calling out in a pinched voice, "Sir Shen?" Inside, Shen Yusher seemed to be shocked as he asked with a pale face, "Who is it?" "A friend," answered Yun Yang. Shen Yusher's voice was trembling. What friend? This official doesn't have a friend like you?" Yun Yang did not have the patience to play along with him. He opened the window with a palm and came before Shen Yusher with a gust of cold air. He said mockingly, "Have you forgotten what Sir Shen has done just like that?" Shen Yusher plopped down on the chair, looking panicked, but he forced himself to remain calm and hollered, "Who are you? When have I ever done anything wrong?" Yun Yang sighed. "Shen Yusher, I'm already standing here. There's no point in you acting anymore." Under the black mask, his gaze was cold, murderous intent. "Shen Yusher, I'm only asking you which day of the 7th, 8th, and 9th month are you?" Shen Yusher looked confused. "This official doesn't understand what you mean." Suddenly he was enraged. "Who are you? What is the crime of entering the residence of an imperial court official in the middle of the night?" "Guards, there's an assassin." Yun Yang rolled his eyes. He had already cultivated the wind and cloud method. His body morphed instantly and he walked over lightly. With a swoosh, he pulled down the painting on the wall. A clean, white wall was revealed at once. Yun Yang snorted coldly and slammed his palm down. With a crack, the wall let out a sound that sounded like wood breaking as a dark hole that led downwards appeared. At this moment, Yun Yang felt a gust of wind at the back of his head as a sharp, murderous intent flashed past. "Finally, you can't hold it in anymore?" Yun Yang did not turn around but struck out with his palm. Boom. It moved brazenly. Yun Yang sprinted 3 steps forward, entering the newly revealed secret passage with the help of the momentum. A few words drifted out from the passage. "Shen Yusher, you're not pretending to be a frail scholar anymore?" Before his words echoed in the air, he had already disappeared into the secret passage. "You're courting death." Behind him, Shen Yusher's originally refined and righteous face was now ashen, his murderous intent unparalleled. His eyes were emitting a green glow. Without a second thought, he followed into the secret passage with a swoosh. The moment he entered the passage, Shen Yusher pressed his right hand to the side. Immediately, swoosh 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 sounds rang out from below. It was the activation of all the traps in the secret passage from the entrance to the secret chamber. However, the moment Yun Yang landed in the secret tunnel, he turned into a gust of wind and sped into the interior. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. He had only traveled 30 feet and had yet to reach the bottom of the secret passage when he realized that countless hidden weapons were shooting at him from all directions. They were so densely packed that there was no gap to speak of. There was also a large amount of poisonous smoke billowing out. There was a variety of colors: red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. Needles as thin as a cow's hair seemed to cover the entire space. On the other side, a strangely shaped sledgehammer ruthlessly smashed down. The reason why it was called a strangely shaped sledgehammer was because the sledgehammer structure was almost as thick as the passageway. Even the weakest person would not be able to dodge it. It was a pity that no matter how tight the attack was, it was useless against the wind. Yun Yang's wind manifestation whizzed past, descending 100 feet straight to the lowest corner amidst the attacks of the countless lethal weapons. He did not stop to think and continued his advance. Behind him, a low growl could be heard. "Thief, stop." Yun Yang was not willing to stop. Instead, he sped up and traversed 170 feet in an instant. Amidst the dense rain of hidden weapons, he made it to the other side amidst the sound of the wind. Yun Yang had already reached another corner. With a press of his hand, a creaking sound could be heard. Suddenly, another secret door slowly opened. Like before, countless hidden weapons shot out from within. There was no way to avoid it. However, Yun Yang's body was illusory. Even when thousands of hidden weapons pierced through him, he remained unharmed. Just as the second secret door opened a slit, a ray of green light had already caught up to Yun-yang from behind. A sword emitted a blinding sword energy in the dark tunnel as it slashed down. However, Yun-yang had already entered the slit in an eerie manner, leaving the sword energy behind him. After moving another 30 feet, Yun-yang felt his vision brighten. In front of him was a secret chamber that was 100 feet in circumference. The walls were embedded with luminous pearls. It was hundreds of feet underground, but it was as bright as day, visible to the naked eye. The secret chamber's furnishings were extremely simple. There was only a table and a chair. Yun-yang curled up and went to the chair in an instant. When Shen Yushi chased after him, he could only see a masked man dressed in black, his eyes filled with mockery as he sat on the chair boldly, his arrogant demeanor obvious. Despite the intense murderous intent in Shen Yushi's eyes, there was also unconcealable shock and fear. He had attacked with all his might and the countless traps in the secret passage had been activated simultaneously. Why had he not been able to stop the other party for even a blink of an eye? What level had the other party's cultivation base reached? The hidden weapons and traps that he had set up were so densely packed that even wind and rain could not penetrate them. He could not figure out how a living person like him could slip through the gaps of the hidden weapons and come here unscathed. Chapter 232. Looking at Yun-yang's spotless black robe that did not even have a tiny hole on him, he knew that he had not been hurt by the terrifying number of hidden weapons. He looked at Yun-yang who was sitting on the chair and asked word by word, "Who are you?" Yun-yang smiled faintly and said, "I should be the one asking you this. Shen Yushi, who are you?" Friend, a straightforward person does not resort to insinuations. Shen Yushi stood with his arms behind his back and said faintly, "Since you can find your way here, I believe you have a motive. Since you know this reputed one is from the Four Seasons Tower, then you should know what kind of existence the Four Seasons Tower is." He continued slowly, "Even Ling Xiaozue, the unrivaled expert in the world, had to retreat in the end when facing the Four Seasons Tower. You'd better think carefully if you can afford to provoke the Four Seasons Tower." Yun-yang smiled faintly. "So, you're really from the Four Seasons Tower?" Shen Yushi chuckled coldly. "Do you think it's interesting to collect evidence now?" His expression changed as he said viciously, "Tell me your motive directly. If it's not too much, I can let you go. Take it as making a friend." A friend? Just wait for the Four Seasons Tower to hunt you down." Yun-yang tilted his head and said, "Sir Shen, Assistant Minister Shen, are you so confident that the Four Seasons Tower can do anything to me?" Shen Yushi said faintly, "I've seen your cultivation base. Perhaps I'm not your match. I'm indeed strange and inexplicable and worthy of pride, but you still have no hope of keeping me here today." With one hand behind his back, he pointed at the surroundings with the other hand and said, "Since you were able to reach this place, you must know the secret of this universe's secret door. In this secret room, there are a total of 10 tunnels that lead to the outside from different directions. Although I'm not your opponent, I have room to maneuver. You won't be able to keep me here. As long as I can get out from any tunnel, I can guarantee that from now on." Shen Yushi's expression was cruel as he said word by word, "You'll never have a day of peace in this life. You won't rest until you die." A powerful threat indeed. Yun-yang said, "I'm actually afraid. This is the curse of a lifetime of nightmares. What should we do?" His tone was relaxed, but was there any sign of fear? Shen Yushi flipped his wrist and an emerald long sword appeared in his hand. He said indifferently, "Since you won't listen to my kind words, don't blame me for being merciless." Yun-yang sat calmly and said with a smile, "You know that you're not my opponent, but you're not thinking of running away. Instead you want to fight me. Obviously, you have other intentions." Shen Yushi's expression changed abruptly. Yun-yang said, "Then let me guess, what is your motive?" A sharp glint flashed in Shen Yushi's eyes. With a sway of his body, his long sword suddenly turned into a bolt of lightning. It was obvious that he did not intend to let Yun-yang continue. Yun-yang executed his destiny steps and walked back and forth in the sword light that was like a dragnet. He then said faintly, "Your goal is nothing more than, in this secret chamber, there's something that you care about or something important that can't be seen by outsiders. That's why you can't leave. Even if you want to leave, you have to use the excuse of fighting. Even if you're not my opponent, you have to find a chance to destroy those things or take them away. Only then can you leave in peace. Am I right?" The more Yun-yang spoke, the uglier Shen Yushi's expression became. The sword light that he emitted grew denser, gradually accumulating to a terrifying level. Let me guess what it is again. Yun Yang's destiny's steps grew faster as he continued to wander in the dense web of swords. However, as the other's sword energy grew more urgent, almost joining together, the faint sound of wind and thunder could be heard. With a swoosh, a green light flashed on Yun Yang's body and a hole was pierced at the bottom of his black robe. A ripple of cultivation method could finally be felt. Shen Yushi was actually shocked before he chuckled coldly and said, "I was wondering what kind of exceptional character it was. So it's just a sixth peak trash? Do you think you're invincible just by relying on a strange skill?" Just now, Shen Yushi had finally forced Yun Yang's true ability with his 8th peak pinnacle ability when he attacked with all his might. Shen Yushi, who had confirmed Yun Yang's true ability, was relieved. He no longer thought of retreating. Instead, he was determined to make Yun Yang stay here. His long sword was pulled back in front of his chest, but the emerald glow of the sword grew brighter. It was obvious that it was ready to strike. Shen Yushi looked confident. "Child, take off your mask and tell me where you came from. Otherwise, this reputed one sword will send you to the underworld." As he retracted his sword, Yun Yang could clearly feel that the dense sword energy around him had disappeared. All of the sword energy had gathered at the tip of Shen Yushi's sword. A huge whirlpool had formed at the tip of his sword. Even the air in the secret chamber was sucked in by the black hole-like whirlpool. It was only a moment of stalemate, but he already felt suffocated. "You should know that with your cultivation base that has just broken through to the 6th peak, you'll never be able to withstand my returning to root." Shen Yushi was determined, facing Yun Yang like a cat toying with a mouse. He had been frightened by this fellow's direct access to the secret chamber, thinking that the other party was some unparalleled expert. In the end, it was just a fellow who relied on his amazing skills to scare others. "No matter how amazing your skills are, my sword has already sealed off the entire space in the secret chamber. Even a mosquito with lightning speed would not be able to escape from this strike. What was more, a living person. This fellow in black was definitely going to die. Since that was the case, he might as well vent the anger he felt from being frightened just now." Recalling how he had almost turned to flee in fright, Shen Yushi was inexplicably furious. If it were not for the existence of the secret that this fellow had mentioned, he might have really been frightened away just now. This was a great humiliation, one that could not be tolerated. Shen Yushi was ready to strike, his eyes gleaming with the confidence of a mountain. He was indeed 100% confident that he could behead this person in front of him with a single strike. There was no way he could escape. The other party was completely locked on by his aura. At such a close distance, with such a tight lock on him, even if the other party's eyebrows were to twitch, he could behead the eyebrows that were moving. He was just that confident. Since he had such confidence, everything was within his grasp. Of course, he could toy with his opponent to avenge the humiliation of being on the losing end earlier. Even when Shen Yushi understood that it was only an illusion caused by Yun Yang's strange skills, he was still enraged. He had to get rid of this knot in his heart. He was a narrow-minded person to begin with. He was already burning with rage. Yun Yang maintained his composure as he sat on the chair and said faintly, "Kill me? Sir Shen, are you really so confident?" Shen Yushi smiled cruelly and said, "You can try whether I'm confident or not. Wouldn't it be clear once you try?" Shen Yushi wanted Yun Yang to move again and again, to fail again and again, to feel the terror of death again and again, to toy with him to his heart's content, until he died. Yun Yang sighed. "You've seen through me?" Shen Yushi smirked. "Do you think you can fool me?" Yun Yang stood up slowly. The tip of Shen Yushi's sword did not move, but the thousands of sword energy had condensed into a tangible form, pulsing and spitting. Yun Yang walked around the table and walked forward step by step until he was 3 feet away from the tip of the sword. He stopped again and said faintly, "It looks like I can't escape today." The cruelty in Shen Yushi's gaze intensified, like a vulture in the desert. He uttered word by word, "Since you're already here, I suggest you keep your naivety to yourself." Yun Yang said dejectedly, "This secret chamber looks like it'll be my burial ground." "It's good that you understand," Shen Yushi said. Yun Yang sighed and said, "I can't scare you, but I've fallen into a hopeless situation instead. This is fate. However, before I die, can Sir Shen clear up my doubts?" Shen Yushi felt that the other's entire body was under his control and asked, "What doubts do you have?" Yun Yang said, "Doubts won't be answered if I don't ask them. If Sir Shen can clear them up for me, I'll tell you whatever Sir Shen needs to know without reservation." Shen Yushi said coldly, "But you're still going to die. You must die now." No information can be exchanged for your life. I know that you're determined to kill me. Death is death, but it's always good if I can be a ghost with an understanding before I die, Yunyang said in a straightforward manner. Then let me see your sincerity first. Take off your mask. Shin Yushir said coldly. Yunyang removed his mask without hesitation, revealing the thin face of a middle-aged man in his 40s. There was no fear on his face. Actually, I don't have many doubts. The first question is, what happened to Wu Lai's family? Was it your doing? Yunyang asked. Wu Lai. Shin Yushir frowned suddenly. Did that fellow send you? If he did, it's rather unexpected. Yunyang did not answer. Shin Yushir denied it immediately. No, it can't be that old fogey. Firstly, that old fogey doesn't have the financial capability. Secondly, he would never do something like this. Instead of saying that he sent you, I'm more willing to believe that you found out about what happened to him unintentionally and came to me for this reason, leading to today's encounter. Yunyang only looked at him without saying a word. Shin Yushir's statement was not entirely wrong, it was at least half correct. Without Wu Lai, Yunyang would not have attacked him so quickly. Chapter 233. Shin Yushir wore a cruel glee on his face as he said, that old fogey has always wanted to get hold of my weakness. How could I not know that? However, he had to pay the price for provoking me. I let him know clearly that I was the one who harmed his wife. I was the one who killed his subordinates. I was the one who crippled his son. Shin Yushir said, then I followed him everywhere he went. Do you know how exhilarating it is to be able to see the miserable state of your enemy every day? Yunyang frowned. Exhilaration? Exhilaration, of course. Shin Yushir laughed heartily, feeling at ease. You knew I was the one who did it, but you didn't have any evidence. You couldn't convict me and you couldn't do anything to me in private either. Even if you used violence without a care for anything, you couldn't find anyone who could deal with me. Then I followed you all the time, swaying around you all the time, giving you a smug look from time to time. I love this feeling the most, to be toyed with and trampled on. Such exhilaration can't be described with words or words. It's the ultimate exhilaration. Yunyang was speechless. Wu Lai had been tortured by him for so many years, yet he had not broken down and gone mad. He could still act in an upright manner. It was not easy to have such a strong temperament. He could endure what others could not. Still, it was not an easy feat. Shin Yushir laughed heartily. Not only in the past but now and in the future I have to follow him and watch him. I have to see how he hates me to the core, how he can't do anything to me despite knowing everything. Isn't he a good official? I'll let him be good till the end. I'll be living in such an atmosphere for the rest of my life. His wife and son are all like that. Even if he wants to risk his life, he can't bear to die, because his family still needs him to take care of them. Shin Yushir guffawed. Exhilaration. This is the best. When Wu Lai dies, I'll find another one like him and do the same to him. This is the most exhilarating thing in this world. Shin Yushir began to talk endlessly as if it was the proudest thing in his life, explaining it in detail. Obviously, he was filled with a sense of accomplishment. However, Yunyang did not want to listen anymore. How could such a deranged thing make this guy so happy? Clearly, he was completely inhumane. Other than Sir Wu, I would also like to know who Sir Shen is in the Four Seasons Tower. What secrets are hidden in this secret chamber? Yunyang said, I believe that the reason for my death is closely related to these 2 points. If I can't figure it out, I won't be able to rest in peace. Shin Yushir thrust the sword in his hand forward and pressed it against Yunyang's throat. With a slight force, a trickle of blood seeped out of his throat. Shin Yushir grinned menacingly. Why did you guess that I'm from the Four Seasons Tower? You can even limit my identity to 7, 8, and 9 months. Who are you? How do you know all this? Yunyang answered in a low voice, I'm from the Merciless Tower. As for you, the reason I know so much about you is naturally because someone wants to kill you. How could I possibly investigate your background? I just didn't expect your cultivation base to be so high in today's atmosphere. You can't do anything to me if either of these are missing. It's a pity that I can't complete the mission, but I'm unwilling to die so carelessly. Shin Yushir could not help smirking as he watched Yunyang flip his sleeve to reveal a gold token. The gold token assassin of the Merciless Tower wants to deal with me. You know that I'm from the Four Seasons Tower, but you still dare to act alone. How bold of you. Yunyang said in a low voice, other than being an assassin from the Merciless Tower, I'm also a citizen of Yutong. Sir Wu is Yutong's pillar. You deserve to die for being his enemy. Shin Yushir chuckled coldly. I was wondering how Wu Lai wouldn't be involved. So you're from Yutong. What you've done today is most likely a personal move. With this, the Merciless Tower doesn't even have a reason to pick a fight. You've died in vain today. It was obvious that Xin Yushi was still trying to strike at Yin Yang's heart, wanting to see Yin Yang break down completely. Yin Yang said, "You even know the Merciless Tower's rules. You must be from the Four Seasons Tower. What day of the month are you?" Xin Yushi grinned and said, "I'll have to disappoint you to the end. I'm not the day of the month." Yin Yang's eyes narrowed as he cried out involuntarily, "Impossible. If you're not from the Four Seasons Tower, how can you be so resourceful?" Xin Yushi wore a faint sneer on his face as he said, "Idiot, I've only said that I'm not the day of the month. When did I say that I'm not from the Four Seasons Tower? Today, I'll let you die knowing that this old man is the end of the 7th month." Yin Yang nodded. "The end of the 7th month? That's the 30th of the 7th month. But why isn't this the day of the month? What's the point of squabbling over words?" The mockery on Xin Yushi's face grew thicker as he said, "So you don't even know the difference? It looks like you've died a foolish death. There are 2 hall masters in the 7th month and a vice hall master is the end of the 7th month. There's no specific date." Xin Yushi's expression was eerily cruel. "Do you understand now?" "I see." Yin Yang was enlightened. "So there's a hall master and a vice hall master at the entrance of each month." Yin Yang said, "The Four Seasons Tower is mysterious indeed. As for the secrets in this secret chamber," Xin Yushi said faintly, "it's only some restrictive spells and the Four Seasons Tower's secret records. I don't think you'll be very interested in these, but I'll still tell you so that you don't have to be so muddle-headed when you leave." Am I not being very merciful? Of course there's also a chance to soar into the sky, it's also here. However, you won't be able to see it anymore. Yin Yang nodded. "I see. I was wondering why I could no longer conceal my spiritual energy once I entered this place. If not for this." In his heart, however, he was thinking, a chance to soar into the sky? Although it's only a small spiritual absorption formation, it's enough to suppress your strange cultivation method. Xin Yushi's gaze was merciless. "Now it's time to answer your question. Who sent you to kill me? I was almost fooled by you just now. Even if you're from the Empire of Yutong, the Merciless Tower's rules are extremely strict. Every order is strictly enforced and every word is law. You've come with a plan and you've even vaguely confirmed your identity as a member of the Four Seasons Tower." Yin Yang sighed. "I can't hide it from you indeed. I've been too naive. Since you've told me your identity honestly, I'll tell you the truth. The one who gave the order this time is the Merciless Tower's higher-ups. Then who hired you to kill me? According to the Merciless Tower's rules, even if it's the Tower's higher-ups, you can still know who the employer is. Otherwise, how are you going to pay?" Xin Yushi asked. This was what he was most concerned about. Yin Yang wore a conflicted expression on his face. Xin Yushi said patiently, "You're going to die today. Why do you have to abide by the rules? If you tell me the truth in a straightforward manner, I'll give you a quick death. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult for you to die even if you want to." Yin Yang frowned as if he had made up his mind after a long struggle and said in a low voice, "All right, actually, the person who wants to kill you is..." Xin Yushi could not help but focus his attention. His ears perked up as well. His heart was filled with resentment. "As long as I know I'll..." Before he could think of anything malicious, he suddenly heard an extremely unexpected name. Perhaps it was a word. Me. Xin Yushi was confused by the name. He then saw the person in front of him retreating abruptly, trying to escape the sword energy's lock. Xin Yushi's mind raced as he understood what Yin Yang meant. With a furious roar, the sword energy of his long sword exploded. "How could you escape when you're so close? Do you think you can escape when there's only a moment's difference? No, you'll only die a worse death. You'll die in pieces." However, Xin Yushi realized that the person in front of him had disappeared at the very next moment. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. There was no trace of him at all. "You shouldn't have let me be so close to you." A cold voice rang faintly. Xin Yushi suddenly felt a scorching heat. What he saw was a ball of flame. Boom. This ball of flame had already completely attached itself to his body, and was currently crackling as it continued to burn. The flames on his body erupted abruptly. "Arg!" Xin Yushi cried out in agony. He sucked in a deep breath. The air of vitality that was stored deep in his dantian erupted to its limit. He was obviously activating a mystic art, wanting to extinguish the flame with the force of his vitality. However, A wisp of flame entered his mouth as he inhaled. With a soft boom, black smoke began to billow out of his orifices. Arc. Shin Yushir was suffering the internal and external burns of the flame. His gut-wrenching cries rang out incessantly. Helpless, he tossed his long sword to the ground with a clang. His body rolled over a dozen times on the ground in an instant. In reality, Shin Yushir had activated at least 4 to 5 mystic arts in that split second, attempting to dispel the internal and external fires. However, the flames burned fiercely and could not be extinguished or dispelled. A moment later, the fragrance of roasted meat rose from Shin Yushir's body. Supreme flame. This is impossible? Shin Yushir shrieked in agony. His body was still rolling around as the flames burned more vigorously. However, the raging flames only burned Shin Yushir's body. Apart from that, the entire secret chamber was not affected by the flames at all. Not even a piece of paper was damaged. Shin Yushir leaped up and dashed out in a frenzy. However, the flames wrapped around his body turned into long strips that bound his legs. As they burned, they pulled in the opposite direction. The muscles on his legs were almost instantly charred due to the clash of forces. Shin Yushir fell to the ground and could no longer get up. Unwilling to give up, he propped himself up with his hands and crawled out with all his might. However, as the flames continued to burn, his fingers were scorching white. With a cracking sound, his finger was burned off. Chapter 234. Shin Yushir cried out, but a gust of flame spewed from his mouth, accompanied by charred powder. Although his mystical skill was strong, how could he withstand the flames burning his internal organs? Burned by the endless flames, he closed his eyes and smashed his head onto the floor of the secret chamber. Please, please, give me a quick death. Arc. Another gust of flame rose from his body. His body convulsed a few times, moaning sounds coming from his throat. Suddenly, with a swoosh, the flame left his body. There was not even a wisp of smoke left. It circled in the air and turned back into Yun-Yang, landing on the ground. However, the moment he landed, Yun-Yang could not stand steadily and staggered, his face as pale as a sheet. Obviously, he had turned into his fire form and fought with all his might, successfully defeating his enemy. The price he had paid was not small, but it was fortunate that it was worth it. After all, he had managed to keep his target here. Actually, Yun-Yang had never thought that he would lose this battle. Although he knew that his opponent's cultivation base was higher than the 6th peak that he had just broken through to, perhaps by more than a level, he still had absolute confidence that he could defeat his enemy. As Yun-Yang's cultivation base improved, the power of his various forms had improved tremendously as well. As long as he played his trump card, he would definitely lose, even if he were to face a 9th peak expert. What truly troubled Yun-Yang was the fact that the gap between their actual abilities still existed. Victory was victory, but he could not make his target stay. Just like what Shin Yushir had said, there were plenty of secret passages in this secret chamber that could be used to escape. With his opponent's cultivation base, he only needed a chance to escape. Facing his opponent's cultivation base that was more than a level higher than his, Yun-Yang could not stop him at all. Once Shin Yushir escaped, the secret might be leaked. At the very least, he would alert his enemy and cause endless trouble. Therefore, Yun-Yang had intentionally created such a scene. Firstly, it was to probe for information, but it was only a side effect. His real goal was to get within 5 feet of Shin Yushir. Only in this way could he have absolute confidence and a 100% chance of victory. Indeed, he had succeeded in one go. In spite of it, Yun-Yang was exhausted. On the ground, Shin Yushir had been burnt to a crisp. His eyes had been burnt into 2 black holes. If an ordinary person had been in this state, he would have died more than 10 times over. However, Shin Yushir's cultivation base was so profound that he was still breathing. He was still groaning involuntarily, his body convulsing. With a wave of Yun-Yang's hand, a gust of icy wind blew against his face. With a flick of his hand, Shin Yushir stopped moving. When he opened his mouth, black smoke came out of his mouth and he coughed weakly. Of black smoke escaped from his mouth as he coughed. As he coughed, black smoke came out of his mouth. An expert at the 8th peak of mystical chi is indeed extraordinary. He's still alive even in this state. Shin Yushir. Yun-Yang said faintly, Shin Yushir, can you still hear me? Shin Yushir's mind was already muddled, but the last stubborn thought in his mind converged into disbelief. No, impossible, impossible, how could it be? Supreme flame. His voice was weak, but the incredulity and disbelief in his voice were still as clear as ever. With just a glance, Yun-Yang was certain that Sir Shin's consciousness was almost gone from the burn. Now there was only a lingering sense of obsession left. What puzzled Yun-Yang was, why is he so sure that I can't be Supreme Flame? He has never doubted that I'm one of the 9 Supremes even though I've been here for so long. This could be said to be extremely unusual. After all, his fire manifestation attack was Supreme Flame's fiery star technique. It was not a lie. How can it be? Supreme Flame. I watched them die with my own eyes. I did it with my own hands. Shin Yusher's voice was weak. Even now he was still in intense disbelief. Yun-Yang suddenly jerked and turned around abruptly. Looking at Shin Yusher's dying body, an unprecedented murderous aura suddenly burst forth. An extremely intense and violent hatred suddenly surged out of him. Watch them die with his own eyes? Personally? Yun-Yang raised his saber angrily. If so, why do you still want an afterlife? The divine edge fell with a swoosh. The moment the saber fell, Emi's energy was already attached to the divine edge. With a swoosh, Shin Yusher's charred head tumbled to the ground. Just as his soul energy left his body, it was struck by a ball of green light and vanished without a trace. His soul was annihilated. His soul was destroyed. He was beyond redemption. Personally, with my own eyes. Yun-Yang sucked in a deep breath, still feeling his body trembling. The dead man in front of him was the first of the masked men Yun-Yang had found during the battle at Tianshan Cliff. No wonder he had never doubted that Yun-Yang was one of the 9 Supremes. Only those who had watched the 9 Supremes die with their own eyes and killed the 9 Supremes with their own hands could have such thoughts and such confidence. Damn it! Yun-Yang panted and only managed to calm himself down after a long time. Suddenly he laughed into the sky. Brothers, I found one. I've killed one. His emotions were surging. I only hate the fact that I don't have the ability to capture him alive. If I could, I would definitely know more clues, and I'll work hard to make him live a long life. Yun-Yang gritted his teeth and abruptly kicked Shin Yusher's corpse into smithereens. His bones were crushed into dust. Death was the most important thing. Normally, people would not do something like torturing a corpse. Usually, Yun-Yang would not even bother to do it. However, Yun-Yang hated that he could only kick Shin Yusher once. He wished that he could resurrect Shin Yusher and kill him again and again. He wanted to let him experience the feeling of being crushed into pieces over and over again. Even so, his hatred was not appeased. After a long time, Yun-Yang walked slowly to the table and sat down. There must be something more to this secret chamber. Yun-Yang forced himself to calm down and focus his attention on the table. The surface of the table was made of a flat piece of white jade, suppressing the papers and other items underneath. Yun-Yang passed the piece of white jade to Emi. Underneath the white jade was a piece of worn-out Shen beast skin. It was unknown what it was made of, but it looked like an incomplete map. As far as the eye could see, it was covered in smoke and fire. It must have been very old, at least quite a few years old. Yun-Yang picked up the piece of leather and tried to tug at it with his hand, but surprisingly it did not budge. He could not help but feel puzzled and used more strength to tug at it, but it still did not budge. More strength, more strength. Even when Yun-Yang had exerted his 6th peak cultivation base, the strange skin did not budge at all. What skin is this? Yun-Yang was shocked. With Yun-Yang's current physical strength, even the skin of a 9th-level mystical beast would not be able to withstand it. The continuous pulling just now would have torn it into countless pieces. However, this piece of skin was not damaged at all. There was not even a trace of it being stretched. Yun-Yang was greatly moved. This piece of skin was already a rare treasure. The content recorded on it must be even more valuable. Upon closer inspection, he realized that this piece of skin was only a corner of the entire map. The edges were very smooth as if it had been cut by a sharp blade. A weapon that can cut such a tough skin must be no ordinary weapon. What would be the content recorded on the skin? A treasure map? A mysterious place? Or perhaps, some cave abode? An ancient ruin? Yun-Yang's imagination ran wild as his imagination ran wild. Could this be what Shin Yusher called a chance to ascend to heaven in a single bound? However, it was still possible for him to find the place marked on the map with only a small portion of the map. Since it could not be turned into a useful resource immediately, he would put it aside for now. Yun-Yang tucked the piece of skin into his robe. After all, there were still many follow-up steps to follow up on. There would be plenty of time to study this strange piece of skin in the future. What came next were some handwritten notes from Shin Yushan. He was very cautious in his actions, actually using code names to write everything. The information made Yun-Yang's stomach churn. A certain day of a certain month, 9th day of the new year, accepted a job from the east, received 700,000 silver taels, codenamed 7,938 mission completed, reported in autumn, a certain day of a certain month. Similar information was written all over the page. Yun Yang's eyes were filled with circles as he read. There was only a stack of paper on the last page. The top of it read, 16 sides prepared, 10 sides ambushed, 9 sides attacked. Driven into Tianshan Cliff. 4 sides attacked, heaven and earth reversed, heaven and earth reversed. 240 mystical cultivators worked together to kill the 9 supremes, eliminating future troubles. This is to be remembered, the might of your reign. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter for generations to come. These words were obviously about the 4 Seasons Tower's attack on the 9 supremes. Yun Yang gritted his teeth and moved on to the next page. The content was exactly the same. The handwriting on each page was clear. Each stroke was serious and meticulous. Shen Yushir must have been extremely proud of this matter. He actually used the content on this piece of paper to practice his handwriting more than once. The dozens of records that followed were the same. Then the content changed. This lowly official is only giving advice and liaising with the upper and lower levels, doing my best for the Tower Master for generations to come. I dare not claim credit. Then it was a series of repetitions. This fellow was a hardcore fan of the 4 Seasons Tower. Does plotting against the 9 Supremes and plotting against them give you such pleasure? Yun Yang was infuriated. He smashed the 2 thick stacks of paper with a slap and pulled open the other drawers of the table to check them carefully. In one of the drawers he found a complete route map. However, he could not confirm where it was because there were no markings on it. Looking at the folded marks, it seemed to have been opened and folded many times. Yun Yang acutely felt that the map seemed to be rather useful, so he put it away carefully as well. Seeing that there were no other clues, Yun Yang began to plunder without restraint. Yun Yang was shocked by his loot when he got to the end. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.